Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacques de Jager. I'm the CEO of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and I'm privileged to address you this morning. What a beautiful day outside. I'm here in Pretoria. I hope you have had also a fabulous week, and want to thank you for joining us for this event, which is the last day of the International Fraud Awareness Week. We've got just a little bit more than 1,000 people registered so far and joining us at this stage. So just a couple of house rules while being with this. You're more than welcome to ask your questions in the chat section, which our moderators will then pull into the question section. If we see a question that can be quickly answered, we'll answer it during the course of the specific speaker's session. Otherwise, they'll also stay on for the Q&A right at the end of today. So it's not a long day. It's a full-packed day, and therefore I'm going to start. Please ask your questions in the chat box. We'll gladly have a look at it and then discuss it at the end of the day. With that said, it's my privilege to open today and to share with you a little bit more about the ACFE and the ACFE International Fraud Awareness Week. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for being with us. What is Fraud Awareness Day, and what is the week all about? So we started with the week, and when I say we, I'm meaning the ACFE International, started with the week more than 15 years ago, and the reason was to talk about fraud and all the different components of fraud, so that people become aware what to look out for, and also then protect themselves, put the necessary measurements in place. So it gives you an opportunity to talk about it, to discuss with your peers, to break down those silos, talk to your co-workers, executives, other stakeholders, and for me, very importantly, talk about it at home, because those at home is more at risk than anyone else. They don't work with it each and every day like we do. So Fraud Week promotes awareness, talking about what is fraud, what's the red flag, what to look out for. It talks about where to report and why to report fraud, and how to participate in ethical individuals in society. So it's not only us that need to talk about it, it's also companies, and we've seen so many companies having their own fraud awareness days. So I want to congratulate them in doing so. I participated in 4 during this week, where I attended other countries as well as other company sessions. So I want to again congratulate you on that. So the ACFE stands for the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, but in this context, it deals with awareness, connecting, having a fresh approach, and energize. Awareness is all about the noticing and knowing what to look out for, not only for yourself, but also for your industry, economy, country, and globally. I'm going to say this maybe one or twice again during this session, but if something is too good to be true, it's too good to be true. So look out for that. Connecting with other fraud fighters and your peers, like I already indicated. Having a fresh approach. Are you upskilling your internal staff? Do they know what to look for? The average organization loses up to 5% of its gross revenue due to fraud. That's been proven over and over and over again, not only by the ACFE, but also by other entities like PwC in their economic report. So how much money are you losing? And why are you losing that money? It's because of a lack of tools, no network, or a minimum of skills that you employ. And when I talk about employment, I'm not only talking about internal staff, but I'm also talking about contractors. How many of them are CFEs? Do know what's expected of them and are regulated? energize? Do you take time out? Get your strength up. But also, do you take time out to stand at the arm's length from and looking at what you are doing? Are you doing the right thing, the morally right thing? That is. I want to include this saying of Warren Buffett. Look for three things in a person: intelligence, energy, and integrity. If they don't have the last one, don't even bother with the first two. I also want to include, this is one of the slides I got from one of our speakers, previous speakers in the conference, Reinhard, indicating that integrity is everything. Do you talk morals and values within your organization? The greatness of a man is not in how much wealth he acquires, but in the integrity and his ability to affect those around him positively. The saying by Bob Marley. If you see fraud, do not say fraud. You are a fraud. Lastly, we're busy with the call for speakers, 2022's ACFE Africa Conference. Be part of it. Take part of it. If you know of a great speaker, let us know. I want to end the session by saying wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it. Right is right, even if no one is doing it. Let's talk about fraud. Let's create more awareness. Let's change the morals and values within South Africa and the world. For more information about the Fraud Awareness Week, please go and visit fraudweek.com. There's a lot of information about it. Tweet today, hashtag Fraud Week, and it will automatically link to our hashtags, and we'll be able to pull that up again. Thank you for being part of this this very, very important week. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and I look forward to the remainder of the day. And I also want to, before continuing and talking about the next speaker, just compliment and thank our sponsors for this week, being CPB, as well as an attorney firm that's new to the ACFE, but very much involved now, Borswa Incorporated. Thank you very much for your contribution and for being here. Up next is CPB. I want to introduce Nick Meyer, who's the Chief Client Officer, and who's going to talk about the importance of complete data in fraud. Now, Nick Meyer has 18 years experience in financial services industry, focusing predominantly on IT system designs and data. Nick completed his MBA in 2012, and in 2017, he completed the CFE course while designing a fraud system for his then employer. In 2020, Nick joined CPB as Chief Client Officer. CPB has multiple insurance, investment banks, and fraud examiners as customers, and are assisting them to proactively detect fraud as well as manage investigations. I'm not sure whether everyone knows, but CPB also provides a service to our members where they have a product. Maybe Nick, you can highlight that, where they've got the product that actually give investigators the ability to go after fraudsters, identifying them, and also pulling up reports. So thank you very much, Nick, for being here.
Thank you.
I look forward to your session.
Thanks. Okay, I just want to check if the presentation is loading for us. Okay, good morning, guys. I hope you guys can all hear me. I'm just still waiting for the presentation to come up here. Just to double check. There we go. All right. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Yaku and ACFE members, really appreciate it. I'm going to do a quick presentation to you. I think I've got 15 minutes, so I'm going to jump straight into it. You are welcome to ask any questions at the end. So yeah, let's go for it. So the importance of complete data and fraud investigations. As I mentioned in the bio, I was involved in designing a fraud system for my previous employer, and that's where we shared data throughout the industry, and I believe that system has gotten some momentum at the moment. But what was always missing out of that equation was to confirm things like identity and just basic data. So the quicker and the sooner you can do that, the quicker you can actually get to the building a proper case at the end of the day. So that's the mindset of this presentation. So they're building a case, free up time for building a solid case. I just put 4 steps as basics for me. Confirm the basics, identify triggers, investigate, and confirm again. So what are we talking about when we talk about basics? Confirm identity directly from Home Affairs. And this is the dynamic report that Yaku alluded to that we offer ACFE members. You can actually set up this report yourself. It is dynamic and all that, but it allows you to confirm all the following information. So I'm going to go through the presentation, and then I'm quickly going to show you guys the actual report itself, and you guys can have a look at that. But to confirm identity directly from Home Affairs, name, surname, ID numbers, you can have it with or without photo, dead or alive status, death date, marital status, end date, issue date, and also the sequence. Remember the issue date and sequence, I'll get to that in a little while. But those are all important things. So that's about the identity that Home Affairs has. When was it issued? What's the sequence? All of that, which could prove to be very, very beneficial. Information on the person of interest, so contact numbers linked to a person. So remember, we're an aggregator of data. That's really what we do. So we get all the credit information and data from other sources. Every single number that's linked to you, whether it's a next of kin or a spouse or whoever, all that information is obviously available. Email addresses and addresses, and it's historical addresses as well. Employer history, we can definitely aid you with that. And then we even have an extra there that we give you executives. If there is executives on the estate, we give you that detail as well. Then to identify triggers, anything from the basic check. So is there anything that's from those triggers that actually stand out for you, or you need to feel that you need to investigate? And then we also have, as part of the report, and I'll show you guys that in a second, the Eagle Eye, where it checks the information on the person, credit profiles. We obviously know if someone is if there's a problem with the payment profile or the payment information, normally it means it's, if there's distress there, that it's going to lead to fraud. So it is a warning sign for you at the end of the day. So check information on a person, credit profiles. We've got the fraud status from the SAFPS. We can tell you if they're under debt review, if there's any judgments or defaults. Credit score and payment information, again, a trigger for you to investigate. And then we can even give you relative information on relatives. Then obviously you still need to go ahead and investigate. Hopefully you've got a few triggers and you can then investigate. All the data does is it empowers you to do this quicker and faster at the end of the day, but you obviously still need to do a proper investigation and confirm everything, because yes, data could be wrong. The chances of that is minimal, but it could be wrong. So you just need to double check that. And then double check your findings against the report. So once you've established your case, and you've built up that proper case, I would actually say go ahead and just double check some of the information again. And there I pointed out a few things that's easy to miss out: the date of death, date of marriage, issue date, etc. What's the sequence of the identity, all of that. And then fit for purpose. So we've designed this report that it's completely configurable. And so in other words, you can say what data segments you require and what you don't require. That's completely up to you guys. And we can set it for you, and we can even add a logo for you. So the logo will be XYZ Investigators as an example. I'll show you that as well in a second. And then that is the quick and to the point presentation. A very big thank you from my side. And just a note there that there are obviously special rates for the ACFE members. And let me just quickly share the report with you, just to have a look at it. And please remember, the report at the moment is one that we created almost for Joe Soap. So it's not a real live individual. And you'll see the picture on there. It's not me, I promise you. The picture we just put there, some cartoon picture as well. So bear with me, and I'll show you that in a sec. Here's the sample report. So you'll see generated the report for Consumer Profile Bureau. We put that in there, but that's actually our logo. Your logo could be here. So again, it's completely configurable for you to say it's from XYZ investigators. Input, all you need is the ID number, and there's the picture, the beautiful picture. So yeah, that's not me, but yeah. So here's all the things we're confirming: ID numbers, surnames, all of that information, marital status, death or alive, all of that information that we give there. We do check the names, we check the deceased information. That's where the executor information is that I spoke to you guys about earlier. And then we confirm the telephone numbers. You'll see all the telephone numbers linked to that person we've got there for you. Here's some more linkages of the information. We even break it down into work numbers, cell phone numbers, email addresses that's linked to the person. And please remember, this is test data, but the functionality is there and it does work for live individuals. Addresses, all the different addresses that there is, employer information, and then you've got your deeds information. Here's the eagle eye that does a check on the person information. Is the ID valid? Is the person a director? Is it deceased? So it's a quick check that actually gets done on the person. And then there's some credit profile under the eagle eye as well. So they've got credit accounts, adverse accounts, have they got judgments, etc. And then there's the ACFE debt review, are they under debt review or not, judgment records, default records, ACFE, and remember it indicates whether it's protective or not as well. Trace locator or tracing, and then credit score. Obviously this person has got a credit score of 0 because it's not a real live person, but that's the breakdown. Payment profile, so you'll see where it's red, obviously it indicates that there has been problems. And then current financial position overview, active accounts overview, there's the relative information, so who are they linked to, and yeah, that's the report in brief. So I was very quick and I was to the point. I hope this added value for you guys. Back to you guys.
Well, Nick, before you leave, let me ask a question that came up, and that's on everyone's mind. We've got about 4 minutes left. Will this report be able to be used in court of law, and have you ever tested this?
So we are getting a legal opinion on it at the moment, but we believe that it is going to be concrete and it will suffice in the court of law. Again, you are actually confirming this from the reputable sources like Home Affairs, etc.
Can I quickly also just say my own experience? Well, when I was still doing full-time investigations, we did use this report, but this report is not used on its own solely. So you actually do your investigation, get all the information, and then verify that, and to make sure that it is in actual fact true. A lot of people, one must remember, it's humans that import the information into the system. So you cannot base your full investigation just on this. You need to use this as a tool, and that's why the ACFE is interested in this. You need to use it as a tool to actually go forward and do your investigation. Just if that's correct, Nick.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Then the
And
information is also retrieved from various sources. So it's not actually CPB that imports the information. It's retrieved from various sources. Maybe just in a minute, can you indicate where you gather the information from?
Sure. So again, we are an aggregator of data, so we get it from multiple sources. Obviously, we are part of the SACRA ring at the end of the day, so we get it from all your credit information that we have, and then we also have deeds information, and we've got other sources of information, SIPC, etc., etc. So we've got multiple sources, but it is actually from the sources of truth, if you can call it that you are getting it back directly from Home Affairs, SIPC, and deeds, etc. So I also see a question there. I think it was Tracy that asked about POPIA. So if you read the POPIA Act, I think it's Principle 6 or 8 says if you're retrieving this information for the purpose of preventing fraud, you are exempted from POPIA. So we're definitely confident, and we've got an actual opinion on the POPIA as well for this report.
So it would be nice if you can maybe share that with us as well, so that we can maybe through our Veritas just send that out, Nick, to the others. And I can confirm that when we also did the discussions with TransUnion a couple of years ago, we also looked at POPI, and it was confirmed that you can share information like this and use information if it's for fraud prevention detection services, not for investigation. Now, the law says investigation is that done by your investigators out there. So and not the normal investigator like we CFEs. So for fraud prevention detection services, and that is up to the point when you've proven that there is sufficient evidence to say that the person is guilty.
Sure.
I just want to quickly see if there's one more question, because morning, when accessing private info like credit bureau info, it leaves a trace. Does yours leave a trace on the inquiry system also?
So what we have to understand is there's two different elements that we need to think about here. So does it footprint? In other words, do we keep record of who pulled the report? Absolutely. Does it negatively impact the consumer at the end of the day for his credit profile? No, we don't do that. So there's no impact on the consumer if you're pulling this report. But we do footprint it. Again, we've got a quite vigorous regime here in terms of compliance and all that. We've got a Chief Client Officer, Stephen Lindsay, and everything that we do, every bit of data that gets pulled by anyone through our system, we keep record of that, and there is a footprint, and we've got to also say the reason why the data was queried, but it doesn't impact the end consumer at the end of the day on his credit score.
With that said, it seems like Thenan, I see what you say about my with my reception. I'll try and turn off the video now and then just to make sure that it's 100% correct. Nick, your details has been requested by Desiree. Desiree,
Sure.
if, we will be sharing all the information of the speakers as to ensure that you can contact the organizations directly. So that will be done. The presentations will also be shared of all those who consented. So don't worry about that. Nick, from my side, thank you very much for the opportunity of having you here. Thanks for sponsoring this event. We'll send all the other questions that we've got through to you so that we can deal with it either this afternoon or you can directly deal with them.
100%. Thank you very much, Jaco, and thanks ACFE members. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Now, with that said, I want to welcome and please excuse the lack of having my face there. We're just sorting out the issue of two. I want to welcome Tariru Butizwa as our next speaker. Tariru is the Vice President, Regional Vice President for Africa. And she is from CIMA. Now, Tariru is a CA, MBA, and that you achieved. She is the Vice President for Africa at the Association of Internal Certified Professional Accountants. As a regional VP in Africa, Tariru forms part of the association leadership team and is responsible for the executive management of the association across Africa. She's going to talk a little bit about how CIMA combats fraud by using fraud risk management tools. So welcome, Tariru. We look forward to this session.
Thank you, Yaku, and thank you to the ACFE for the invitation for CIMA to be part of this event. Also, thank you to ACFE members and the larger group of professionals for joining us today. Also, thank you to the previous speaker, Nick. I think that was quite interesting, the things that you do there. And obviously, it does benefit the whole fraud prevention and detection landscape. So I don't know if you can see my slides. Okay. All right.
That's it.
Fine. Thank you. All right. So like Yaku said, if it's too good to be true, it's not true. Fraud is basically everybody's responsibility. We've all gone through some form of fraud that we have seen or that has been perpetrated against us on our organizations or on us personally. So it's quite a very relevant topic to be discussing in this digital age of technology. But I'm going to frame my presentation to just speak about, firstly, I'm going to just give you an overview of what CIMA is for those who do not know, the fraud landscape that we find ourselves in, and also how we are managing fraud within our organization. There is quite a broad array of fraud that can happen within our organization, but I'm only going to focus on the fraud on the qualification and how we do capacity building for professionals to understand what fraud is, how to prevent it, and how to do corrective actions if they've been victims of fraud. So just going into a bit of history in terms of who CIMA is, most of you will know CIMA as the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, but now we are part of a bigger association, which is called the Association for International Certified Professional Accountants, also known as the association. So if I refer to the association, I'm talking about that. And this is a joint venture or a joining of two organizations, which is the American International Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the public accountants in the Americas, and also CIMA. Together, we formed the association. And this venture, or this coming together of these organizations, has given us about 650,000 members and students, and also some good knowledge and wealth on leadership, strategy, risk management, and technology. Also, we focus on continued education and training resources that I'll talk about when I speak on what we do for capacity building. In Africa, we've got 5,100 members, and 13,700 of them are of students, and all of them are residing in about 37 countries across the continent. Our goals are pretty much aligned to what every professional organization in the accounting space or elsewhere strives to do. So we want to drive a dynamic accounting profession worldwide. We also want to contribute to leading edge learning innovation for all professionals. We also want to continue research and improve our educational content, and we deliver topics, a wide range of topics for our continuous professional development. And we also endeavor to have strategic partnerships with many organizations. We have a partnership also with ACFE, where we've got pathways into each other's qualifications. So those are the types of partnerships that we leverage on to drive the profession forward worldwide. So when we talk about the fraud landscape that we find ourselves in, obviously there's internal fraud. I'm not going to really spend time on it, which is probably perpetrated by employees on the organization or the organization on other external stakeholders. And we also have external fraud. If I can just give a bit of context here, we have seen quite a number of high-profile cases coming up in the media of high-profile people or even lower-level people falsifying qualifications, misrepresenting what qualifications they have. That is fraud on a qualification. And then we've also had students or non-members of professional organizations trying to get entry in those professions fraudulently using false qualifications, or they want to defraud the exam process by cheating in those examinations. So it becomes very key for any professional body, including SEMA, to make sure that we prevent such activities as happening in our space, because credibility is very important for any professional body and for any professional. And we have tools and we have processes that try to safeguard that. The risk of fraud on qualifications is also quite high, especially when we consider the high unemployment that has happened owing to the events of COVID, which has made it worse actually. So there is quite some incentive for people to start being fraudulent. We are in the digital age where everyone probably has a LinkedIn profile. We have also seen quite a number of people misrepresenting their qualifications and experience on those profiles to take advantage of the headhunting space that is now quite prevalent on that platform. So these are the things that we are always continuously assessing and seeing how to mitigate. But more importantly, our students, members, and the accounting professionals or all professionals at large are managing fraud risk in their organizations. We also have tools to help them combat fraud in their organization, to protect their reputation and also to protect the profession at large, because it's gone through quite some rough patches in the past. It has gone through some rough patches in the past, and this needs us to be a collective in trying to assist and combat such things. So I'm only going to be dwelling on those two places because I've got limited time and I can't go into all the facets. So fraud risk management on the profession. Internally in SEMA, we've got quite some extensive governance processes to establish the tone on top, where we do not tolerate any fraud against the qualification. So we've got a professional standards committee, we've got an exam quality assurance committee that both are in the preventative and also in the corrective control space in terms of fraud. And we also have continuous fraud risk assessments on the qualification that is championed by our education team to make, and our internal risk management also to make sure that the profession's credibility is always protected. We also leverage on technology. You can understand with 650,000 members and students, and also we need to protect their data that we store. There's been a lot of fraud that is related to identity theft and things like that, and we have systems to make sure that we protect this information that we keep on in behalf of our students and members. and also to train our staff on what are the triggers, what are the things that they need to look out for in order to prevent fraud. So also to protect the qualification, we also have some data-driven fraud prevention techniques. So I'll give examples of what can happen in terms of data analytics to make sure that there is the fraud on the qualification is prevented, or detected actually. So we use quite a bit of data analytics to check the exam patterns. For example, if somebody is going to be taking 4 exams in a day, that's a trigger. Our monitoring system then go to investigate that particular incident to see if it was a genuine thing or it's somebody who's trying to defraud to commit fraud on the qualification. We also have data-driven analytics on our professional qualification and our digital platform for the professional qualification that is called FLP. And we also, when students apply, there's students who might come into the qualification and are not successful, and they want to come back as another student or maybe using a different. We have systems that can try and pick up those things, so that we mitigate it upfront. Obviously, we also have fraud hotlines that are safe to speak up on. In terms of corrective actions, it's important for us to get reporting processes of all incidents to ensure that we have corrective actions that are done appropriately and timely. So that's where the professional standards and also the exam quality assurance committees also get involved to make sure that we protect the credibility of the profession, and it's everyone's responsibility to do that. And we also, in terms of capacity building, we are in an increasingly digital world with rapid changes and challenges to business, and the professionals need to continue to create and protect organizational value. And on the protection of organizational value, fraud risk management is part of it. So we also have quite some governance around it in terms of our education department and risk management departments. We also entrench the culture of continuous improvement and anticipating change, because we cannot wait for change to become apparent. We have to anticipate it and get ready for it based on the trends that we'll be seeing. So we have a culture of improvement on our professional qualification as well. Our syllabus is always getting improved. So in terms of, in our final stage, which is the strategic level, we have a full risk management module that is talking to enterprise risk management, strategic risk, internal control, and cyber risk, which also takes into account the elements of fraud in there. We also have on the strategic level financial strategy module, which is also talking about financial risk management. This equips our students to go into the marketplace and be able to be vigilant and know how to prevent fraud. We also understand that this is updating of syllabuses. There is people who've gotten the qualification before, and there's always rapid changes. So we invest quite a lot in CPDs. We also call them promoting competency globally. This is open to all professionals. It's not just to our members and students. And we've also partnered with other leading companies in terms of the training space, like Business Partnering Institute and Business Learning Institute, to provide access to world-class learning or to deliver a competence-based curriculum, courses, and content. So in terms of our content, we have from basic content to other more complicated content, and some of it includes basic analytics of detecting fraud, even on an Excel kind of way. If you're a small entity that probably can't go the full-blown and more sophisticated systems. And then we also have courses on how to identify fraud, how to prevent fraud, and handling fraud identified. When you identified a fraud in your business, what do you do about it? Or if you're a victim of fraud in your business, how do you handle it going forward? And we also have C-suite fraud. It's very difficult to address that one for most companies, because the higher the level of where the fraud is being perpetrated, the more complex it becomes. But we also give training on how to handle those things to all professionals. And, you know, right now, with the way, there's also emerging reporting risk, fraudulent reporting risk, like with the wake of sustainability reporting, ESG reporting. There are some companies that are doing what they call greenwashing, reporting wrongly about what their initiatives on ESGs are. That is an emerging risk that we have to also think about as professionals on how to handle it, because it's got obviously reputational and also financial losses attached to it. So this is what we do in CIMA in a nutshell. I've just tried to speed through it and just give a high-level synopsis. I think I still have 2 minutes. So if there's any questions or if that have come through, Yako, I'll be able, I can address them. But other than that, thank you very much once again to the ACFE for the opportunity, and to the members and the delegates that are on the call for listening in to my discussion on how CIMA combats fraud. Thank you very much.
Tariru, thank you very much for being here. Maybe on your side, you can just end the screen share. What we've seen is you're quite right. Risk management is very important when we need to deal with preventing fraud within our organizations. It's actually so key that the ACFE wrote a book on risk management with COSO, business risk management. So you're more than welcome as MOU partner, your members and all the other members that's from other professional bodies here today, to also go and download the book on the ACFE's website, acfe.com. But yes, thank you very much for insightful presentation. It was great seeing you. I look forward to welcoming you back on stage again at one of our own events as well. It was very insightful, like I indicated. I really hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll chat about your questions a little bit later. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
All right. With that said, I'm going to go over to the next speaker. Just waiting for Philip to come up on stage. While we're busy with that, I want to just go on with something that Tariru indicated, and that is that 64% of all fraud, according to the report to the nations of the ACFE, is being perpetrated by someone internally. That's a shocking figure, and that talk about risk management and the importance of risk management. Then also, if we look at cyber, something that's affecting us each and every day now, when we talk about cyber, it's all about 91% of fraud being perpetrated by that. So, Philip, if you can hear us, you must just come up to the stage. While waiting for Philip to sort out quickly his things, I'm going to deal with a question or two that came up. presentations will be shared, like I indicated, with of all those who indicated that we're allowed to share the information. So far, everyone did. Question, also presentation, I quickly want to see here. Nico, I'll deal with your CMAR question a little bit later so that we can deal with that. There you are. Vikeshni, I'm going to go over to you. Thank you very much for standing at this stage. We'll deal with Philip's presentation then a little bit later. Now it's my great pleasure to work and to introduce Vikeshni Vandayar. She's the Executive Governance and Corporate Services Officer at the IOD South Africa, the Institute of Directors South Africa, and the topic today will be setting the tone from the top, the role of the board. Vikeshni joined the IOD SA in January 2015. Her current role is Executive Governance and Corporate Services, oversees the IOD SA Corporate Services through leadership and research publications as well as advocacy. In addition, she also acts as the IOD SA Chief Information Officer, and is the IOD SA's Registered Information Officer. Due to her oversight and passion over privacy, cybersecurity, and technology, Vikeshni promotes innovation and digital transformation within the business and is responsible for a number of IT-related initiatives. She has recently been appointed to the board as an executive director. Congratulations, Vikeshni. During the time at the IOD SA, she has contributed and or co-authored a number of publications, including the King 4 SME sector supplement. Participated in a number of speaking arrangements and is one of the IOD SA's spokespersons on media and broadcast as it fits within her role. She's also a member of all the IOD SA forums as well as the King 4 Thought Leadership Working Group and the Anti-Intimidation and Ethical Practices Evaluation Panel. During the past 2 years, she has become widely known amongst members as the host of the IOD SA's Boardroom Bites at 9 webinar series. Vikeshni is an admitted attorney at the High Court of South Africa with a BCom Accounting and LB degree with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the LLM in International Commercial Law from the University of Glamorgan, Wales. That you can tell us a little bit later about your Wales journey. Prior to joining the IOD SA, she specialized in corporate and commercial law as well, protection of personal information advisory consulting, which has provided valuable commercial and business acumen to her current role within the IOD SA. I want to welcome you to this session and I look forward to your presentation. Thank you very much for jumping in and taking this forward for us, Vikeshni.
My pleasure, Yaku. Just want to check everyone can see the slides.
At this stage, we see you, so maybe our...
How do I share on the slides? If anyone can help me there. There we go.
No, that's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Yaku. So I'm going to talk a little bit around what does it mean by setting the tone at the top and what's the role of the board, specifically from a fraud prevention or corruption prevention perspective. So I think most of us know the board is the custodian for corporate governance in terms of the organization, and they have the responsibility to set the tone for the ethical environment in which itself as the board, as well as the organization it oversees, should operate in. So the board, together with executive management and the management teams, I think play a very pivotal role in setting this direction, and they do this via a number of ways. The key point is driving the ethical culture, and I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into what that means. But what's important is, in order to drive an ethical culture, we need an ethical board. So having the right people on the board, having board members that share the values that you would want in the boardroom for that organization becomes key, because they're the ones that are going to have to drive that standard of behavior that they want to see in the executive team and the organization itself. We then will have policies in place, such as your code of ethics, your management of conflicts. But beyond just having these procedures and wonderful things in writing, the board actually needs to get assurance from the executive team and your various assurance providers that these policies are actually being implemented, and getting a bit of comfort from the executive reporting that they are actually instilling these values that they've set in the organization. And this can be done through putting it part of your KPIs for your team. It's through reporting, having a whistleblowing hotline that we've mentioned earlier today. So those are the ways in which you want to make sure that what we've put down in writing is actually happening. And then I thought, just because of the environment that we're in at the moment, being in this digital space, working from home, one of the key fraud items at the moment is actually from external sources, your phishing scams, your cyber security breaches. So the board also has to stay on top of and understand what these risks are to the organization, understand the value of the information that it has, and what it needs to do to make sure that it's got proper security measures in place. And I think in the time that we're in now, we've got to go one step further, especially from a finance perspective. For example, if somebody asks for change of banking details for an invoice, even if it comes from the right email address, the controls that we put in place needs to actually show our finance team is actually calling that person up and saying, I received your request. Did you send it? Is this the correct details? Before we actually action it, because if someone's email is hacked, you wouldn't know whether or not it's actually them or not until after the fact. So a bit more overview or oversight of the controls we're having, and just upping that up given the environment we're in now. But that being said, we can have the best policies and frameworks in place, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the actions taken when there's a transgression, when something goes wrong, and how we actually manage conflicts both at the board level and within the organization, because that's what's actually going to set the tone of what's acceptable or not. So what are ethical values? The King IV report in Principle 1 sets out 5 ethical values, namely integrity, competence, responsibility, accountability, fairness, and transparency. And these are the values we believe underpin an ethical leadership and cultural environment. And I think these are the same values that we need in anyone that we employ or appoint on the board in order to combat fraud. So Principle 1 does outline what each of these values mean and gives you examples. So you can go have a look at the report for more detail on that. But I'm going to go more into what does it actually mean to be ethical. We would say ethical is being honest, following good moral standards, knowing the difference between right and wrong, not taking advantage of a situation. And I guess the most common phrase is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. I came across an article from Bruce Weinstein, and I hope I said his surname correctly, who interviewed a few leaders, and he noted quotes from them as to what they believed ethics is. And I want to share 3 of them, which I thought stood out for me. The first was from Phil Jones. He's an author, and he says, ethics is doing what you said you were going to do, when you said you would do it, and in a way that is respectful to all stakeholders. Then Raul Rosenthal, the president of the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, says ethics is practical and it plays a part in everything we do. Lastly, Richard Hunt, president and CEO of the Consumer Bankers Association, says, above all else, ethics is the measure of someone's character and credibility as a respected leader, co-worker, and friend. And I thought that's quite a powerful summary of what ethics is. But what's ethical could be different to everyone, because it's based on our morals, our values, the people that we grew up with that influenced those values and what's right and wrong, the society we live in, the environment that we work in. And whilst we may have some statutory and legal requirements that put a line in the sand of what's right and wrong, in most instances, the question of whether to do something or not when you're faced with an ethical dilemma is going to come down to that individual's perceptions and views. And therefore, from a board and a leadership perspective, it's so important for us to actually create the ethical culture we want in the organization. And that's actually setting what are the standards of behavior we want? What are the values we see are key, so that when we are employing people, we're also getting people that believe in those same values. And culture, what's culture? It's set up by a group of people. It's a group of people that share and exude social behaviors, beliefs, what they think they should be operating in, and influencing each other. The principle 2 in King 4 speaks about this and talks about the board's role in governing the ethics of the organization. And so for me, in a way, as leaders, we need to create that culture in the organization that we want to see, because we, at the end of the day, have to set the tone and lead the example. So setting the tone means having an ethical leadership base. It means defining what are the behaviors, the standard of conducts and values we want, and making sure we get those people in those positions. And then it's actions over words. It's about what you do when something goes wrong, because that individual is then going to know whether or not those actions are acceptable. And it also then influences the rest of the team as well. And I think each of us has a role to play, both in our organizations as well as in the society and communities we live in, to set that ethical tone. And then lastly, very quickly, just a little bit about the IODSA. We are a professional body for directors recognized by SACWA. We're a non-profit company, and our main focus is promoting corporate governance and directorship as a profession. We're the conveners of the King Committee, and we own the copyright in the reports. We produce a heap of governance publications that you can find for free on our website. That's on your screen there. There's the address. And we offer membership, individual training, customized corporate services. And as a membership body, we are a community for directors to network, learn, and keep abreast of what's happening in the governance space. We're also offered 2 designations, a certified director designation and a chartered director designation. Certified director looks at showing that you've got the key foundational knowledge to be a director, and chartered director focuses on your experience. So those are for your seasoned director who wants to show that I have the experience and all the competencies in terms of our director competency framework. And then just lastly, I think something that's often misknown or thought of, we are not a regulatory body. So we actually have no powers to remove a director from a board itself. Our powers realm mainly around our members and designees, as they need to abide by our member code of conduct. So if you know a member who you feel is transgressing our code of conduct, we can then look into that, hold a disciplinary, and revoke either their membership or their designation. And that's the role that we play from that space. So thank you very much, Yaku, and I look forward to engaging with the others later.
Because this is a brilliant presentation. It tells us a lot about the IOD. What is something that I want to point out about IOD is you also, like you indicated, sitting on the APF forum, as well as you're very much involved with the with all the structures that leads to good corporate governance and reporting of unethical behavior within organizations. The IOD promotes also something that I support, the no tolerance of those who commit fraud within the organization. And I know that although we promote it, sometimes companies don't act in accordance, but you do go after the transgressors who just get a golden handshake and a golden watch and get to walk off as well. So thank you very much for the presentation. I really enjoy it, and all the comments is quite clear about that. I look forward to talking about the questions a little bit later at the end, and we'll see you a little bit later back on stage. Thanks, Vikesh.
Thank you.
All right. So the issues have been sorted out with Philip. Philip, if you can just come live, then I can do the introduction. Hi, Philip. It's always great seeing you. All right. Let me introduce you. Philip Ragwale is the current president of SAIGA, who's going to talk today about fighting fraud in the public sector, how RGAs can assist. Philip is a 36-year-old coming from Northwest Province, working previously at the Auditor General as senior manager with more than 13 years audit experience in state-owned entities, national government department, provincial department, public entities, municipalities, and regulator. He's currently working for the city of Ekurhuleni as group divisional head, responsible for performance audits and economical efficiency and effectiveness review of the project management regarding capital projects. Philip is also responsible for group operations audit reviews. He's currently the president and chairperson of the Council of South African Institute of Government Auditors, or SAIGA, where he is responsible for the strategy, development, and direction to represent the Institute, to act as ambassador for the Institute, and to liaise and act on behalf of the Council. Lastly, he's also working as a Christian spiritual leader, doing pastoral work, which includes working with traditional and online churches. He's a member of the ACFE also, and they just finished their conference. I think it was yesterday that you've had your conference. So, Philip, thank you very much. Welcome. I look forward to listening to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. Good morning, everybody. So I'll just do a quick presentation, basically on the role of SAIGA into the whole fraud awareness and obviously detection and so forth. So at SAIGA, we just as a brief, at SAIGA, we train external auditors in the public sector. So what I'm going to be touching on quickly on my presentation, I'll be touching on just to create also awareness out there. What are the audit outcomes? What are the fruitless and wasteful expenditure and unauthorized and irregular expenditure? And how do we deal with it? And what is our response as SAIGA as well? I think it's important also to know that our members are the ones who are discovering some of these things as they work for the Auditor General of South Africa. So I just want to touch on, just to paint the picture as well, what are the trends in the sector in terms of public sector. So if I just start, you'll see that in terms of, and I just focused on local government specifically because we just finished the elections. There's going to be new council out there in terms of different municipalities. So if you look back 2016, if you just look at the bottom side of things, the green side, they represent clean audits. So we, out of 257 municipalities, we had only 33 in 2016 and 17. Today, fast forward to 2019-20, and currently we're looking at only 27. So there's been a regression in terms of how the outlook looks out there. And if I just also move to the next slide, just 1 year of 2019-20, we had 3.47 billion of fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And the main contributors there you can see on the map, which is Northwest, Free State, Gauteng Province, and also Mpumalanga. So that's where there's been money that was spent and nothing was received in return in terms of government. And then if I go to the next one, where they have overspent on their budget, which is looking at 22 billion for just 19-20 financial year. And again, the main culprits is Northwest, Gauteng Province, and Free State. And then in addition now it's KZN. And if I go to the next slide, one of the interesting things is that out of all the municipalities that was audited, you're looking at 92% of them not complying with supply chain regulations in the public sector. And then what's more scarier is that you've got state officials doing work with government. You're looking at 52% of those awards that is being awarded in the public sector. And also that you've seen that the employees and councillors also getting tenders from government. And just on the bottom there is just the movement of the regular expenditure across the years, but you can see that there's been an upward trajectory in terms of that, up to when you're looking at that is 26 billion just in 1 year when coming to municipalities. Okay, just moving right along. I've spoken to fruitless and willful expenditure and unauthorized. Now I'm looking to irregular expenditure, where obviously processes are not followed in terms of awarding tenders. So you can see that 26 billion in 1 year, and then the main culprits there is Northwest, GP, KZN, and Eastern Cape. So those are the worrying factors as well. And then if I move across, how do we deal with this in the public sector? Firstly, I'll just touch on what government should be doing. So there are mechanisms that government should be using, which are in the legislation, and they are not being utilized to the full potential. Just to touch on this, in terms of what different councils in different municipalities should do, there's only one thing that they are required in terms of the act, is that they must recover the money, and we have seen little of that. And the other thing that the act also gives them is to write off the obviously the debt in terms of money that should be recovered from the culprits that would have committed such irregular expenditure. But the different municipalities opt to write off. So there's hardly any recovery of the billions of rands that have been obviously irregularly spent or fruitless and wasteful expenditure that is obviously not recovered out there. So that is just what basically in a nutshell what the slide is want to illustrate. And then let me just I'll skip this one, maybe go to the next one. So what is then required? I think we should know that. I think the tone at the top in terms of different mayors and council is needed for us to be able to have the accountability needed. And then the other thing as well, which is important, is needs to be a lot of capacity building in terms of different officials in municipalities and so forth. And also, I think there needs to be a strong control environment that needs to be able to get rid of some of the things. And then I think consequence management is the main thing which we don't see. And it's one of the things that I just touched on, that there's hardly any recovery. Conviction, I don't even want to go there in terms of prosecution, because it's one of the things that you can say is almost non-existent in the sector. So if I move right along and say, how do we as SAIGA respond to all this? Our main thing is that we've got an academy that we've also in partnership with public sector, where we train professionals across different roles, which is, for example, your CFO, supply chain managers, and also councillors who are coming through, also do inductions in terms of with partnership with SALGA and so forth. So we do a lot of training for us, not just that we only professionalizing registered government auditors, which work in the public sector, but we also do a training to different officials out there. And then secondly, what we also do, we also assist them in terms of how they should be managing service delivery, and also the reporting thereof as well. The other thing is that when they need in terms of different reviews and so forth, we also assist them in terms of their accountability leg, which is obviously where they need to do investigations and all those kind of things. So those are the things that we also assist them in terms of public sector. So there's a lot that we do public sector, but obviously there needs to be more uptake in terms of different role plays, including municipalities out there. So that is just my story, Yago, and I think I will then end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip, for that. I'm going just to ask quickly 2 questions. The rest I'm going to keep for the end of the day. There was a couple of comments that was actually made earlier in that, can RGAs really follow the money and the paper trail? What do you think? Do they have the capacity and the ability?
Yes, not definitely. We've got, before you become an RGA, you go through a really serious training, including some of it is thanks to ACFE. It includes some of the fraud detection and obviously programs that ACFE has assisted us with. So our professionals, they can be able to do forensic investigations as well in the public sector, and we've seen that. And then obviously they also form part of the team of the Auditor General who are doing various audits out there in the public sector.
Thank you very much, Philip. I'm actually going to leave the 3 other questions for you for later. It's a very informative presentation, like so many others have indicated, talking about the tone at the top and linking on with Vikesh. So stay on for later. We'll call you up to stage again. Glad we sorted out your problems. And then we'll deal with the other questions that was raised. Thanks very much, Philip.
Thank you.
Right. With that said, I've got the pleasure of moving over to the next speaker. Before I formally introduce you, Amanda, I want to just quickly say the Fraud Awareness Week is all about creating awareness, not only, like I indicated in the beginning, for us to protect ourselves as individuals and our companies, but also our households. So it's all about how do we look after those that's close to us. Do we talk to them about things like skimming devices, tapping devices? Our children and our parents and our sisters and brothers walk around in the street not always knowing how to protect themselves at ATMs and things like that. And this is one of the main reasons why we also decided to bring on Amanda Bosinger to come talk to us from Scotland, because she actually deals with those that's very close to us, close to our hearts. So without further ado, I want to introduce Amanda as the Business Development Officer for Scotland's, who's going to talk today about ethics can be child play. Amanda has worked in the non-profit industry for 5 years, gaining experience in early childhood development and the importance of education at foundation stage. As a business development officer, she's passionate about developing children holistically. Previously, Amanda was in the media industry where skills helped create stories. In addition, she's involved in the South African Transplant Sports Association, where she is currently the chairperson. She represents at SASCOC and believes that everyone should try and make a positive impact in society. Outside of the office, Amanda enjoys Pilates and spending time with her family and friends. Those that I said is close to us. Amanda, you've got a very good and a huge supporter in the ACFE for what you're currently doing. Share that with us, and let's see how many others will get involved.
Thank you for that. We're just going to start off with a video. If we could just play that, please.
So it seems like there's a small technical issue with the video clip at this stage, with the attendees, Amanda. So just switch your sound back on, and then and then we'll talk through it. for
Okay,
now.
perfect. No problem. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Bossinger, as you've heard, and I have the pleasure of working with Cotlands, a historical organization in the Business Development Department. Today, we are focusing on the importance of getting the foundation right for a better future. We need to just actually get my presentation up so that I can just talk through my slides. If that's possible, please, or else I can do it. There we go. The facts. There are roughly 1.2 million children in South Africa who have no access to any kind of ECD education, which is quite a problem in SA at the moment. 1 in 5 of our children are born with an underdeveloped neurological function, and that's due to malnutrition. And we have a 22% literacy rate in grade 4. Our solution. So basically, Cotlands exists to close this gap. Through our non-center-based toy libraries, play groups, we give the children the opportunity to learn through play. We own and operate 9 toy libraries around South Africa, 47 play groups, and 8 mobile toy libraries. And last year, we reached 9,383 children, which is a lot lower due to COVID, unfortunately. And then we have accredited training programs. Our key focus areas, we have play groups, birth to 2 to 6-year-olds. We focus on nutrition, health, and psychosocial support. We have toy libraries, capacity building, training which is accredited, and then BEE alignment through enterprise development, skills development, and socioeconomic development. So toy libraries, we have hubs, and then we have the mobile units. So when one thinks of a toy library, you think books. Now imagine this. We replace those books with educational toys. We categorize them in the various aspects of skills. And from there, we then have this available for our children to use. It's a lending service for our practitioners where they can come in and take out the toys and take them back to their various facilities, and they can teach the children various skills through the educational toys that we have available. We then have play sessions at our toy libraries where the children can then come through and come and play, and we will train them up and teach them all the various skills they need to. And also very important, training up of parents and the practitioners. We teach them the importance of education. We teach them how to make toys out of waste, because the people we are dealing with are in very rural areas. Some of them haven't seen half the toys or even a third of the toys that we have available. Then we have a mobile aspect of this. You know, with the rural areas we work in, some of these ECDs are somewhere between 40 and 60 kilometers away. These children also need to have the access that children near the hubs are. So what we do is we have mobile units where we go deliver these kits off to these various ECD centers, and we actually train up the practitioner on what the toys actually represent and how they teach and play with the children with the toys. And then every 2 weeks, we go back and replace them. So in our early learning play groups, we focus on birth to 2 years old and 2 to 6 years old. Our birth to 2-year-old groups. So as most people know, the first 1,000 days are the most crucial. This is where parents play the biggest role in our children's lives, socially and emotionally. It also allows us in Cotlands to pick up any kind of issues that the children may have, so we can try and address them before they get a little bit older and it becomes a little bit harder to address. Our 2 to 6-year-old play groups. So these are very high impact 4-hour sessions where we teach our children very critical skills, namely pre-maths, pre-literacy, pre-language, fine and gross motor skills, as well as problem solving. We also develop their social and emotional development abilities too. But then we also come across the very important soft skills, which we all need in life to become good citizens. Through our approach, we create an environment where children feel safe. We give our children a voice. We make sure they're comfortable within themselves and with their peers. We interact on a daily basis in groups, and this is where we give our children instruction and give them responsibilities, and so they learn. We teach them accountability, trust, respect, the importance of rules and doing the right thing. And obviously, we every day have situations which we call learning moments, where Lele may have taken Sipo's toy away, or Sipo has knocked Naledi over the head with the toy. We would stop our classes and actually address the issues so that the children can understand, why did you do that? Was it the right thing to do? Is it nice to see your friends sad? We teach them these kind of skills. We ask them these questions to make sure that they always realize that doing the right thing is the most important thing to do. So ethics at foundation level. Being leaders in the ECD space, we work very closely with our communities and we know what they need. South Africa is a very, very young population, roughly 25.6 million children and adults, or children and youth. That's basically what gives us 47% of our population currently. So what we need to realize is that this is the critical time where criminal activities usually happen, is in that youth period. And we need to make sure that we address it early enough so that we can try and stop that from happening. Ethically, South Africa is underdeveloped currently. I mean, a good example is the riots and the looting in July, where parents were taking children to the shopping malls as if it was a shopping experience. We need to create a mindset of change, and this can happen with the children. Then we saw an opportunity. Together with the guidance from PwC, we realized that we could make a bigger difference if we emphasized more on why doing the right thing was so critical. Not only would we change the trajectory of the child in terms of schooling, but ethics too. And this is where our game originated. So we're focusing on the foundation stage. It fits our pedagogy. We learn through play. We love having fun. We love interacting and making learning an experience where it's enjoyable. The game is essentially played with an adult and children from the ages of 4 to 6. How we see it happening is we would put these into our play groups, all 47 of them, where we can play the game on a regular basis. But we can also put them into our toy libraries, where the practitioners and teachers have access to come and take out the game, take it home, take it to the facilities and play it with their children too. We can then also create play sessions for parents when we have our parent training sessions. They can come in, we can interact with the parents, we can teach them how to play the game. And not only are the children learning, but we're then educating the parents too. But it doesn't help that we're playing the game, but we don't actually know if we're making a difference. Through our very stringent monitoring and evaluation process at Cotlands, we actually will be able to see behavioral changes and gauge the impact we're making through repetitive play. So, the research. At this point in time, children who are exposed properly to ECD, it's a proven fact, are more successful than those who don't. Adults with no ECD have a higher risk by 30% of being arrested at least once over and above a person who has had ECD. A very important extract from Professor Hickman, which is something I love to say, is start at birth, coordinate services into comprehensive early childhood programs, and achieve greater and social gain. Currently, through our game, we'll be able to instill the fundamental core, which creates that thing of doing the right thing by repetitive play. Through completing the game over and over, we'll be able to embed this in the children's brains of what is the right thing to do. When do we always do the right thing? And by putting that into a child's brain, it's 21 days and you've created a habit. Imagine if we keep doing this. So currently, what we need, we have our partners, which is Cotlands. We've designed the program. We've got Toys with Roots, which is a local manufacturer to manufacture our game. But all we need is the funding to get this game to our children. So the benefits of this. Educating our children at their informative years. We'll be aiming at families and parents where they can actually interact with their children, play a game, have fun, laugh, bringing that family back together. It is a one-to-many adoption. And what's wonderful about this is that it's an Africa thing. It's not necessarily a South African thing. We were actually talking about it the other day where we were saying, we're hoping that this could be the next Monopoly. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Where it becomes worldwide and everybody just knows when to do the right thing. And in conclusion, we want to mold well-rounded individuals who can become part of a sustainable society, build a nation of employable, ethical young adults. Help us make the impact where it counts. I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity and appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Amanda. I'm going to leave the questions to the end. There's a couple of questions for you, and rather use this time just to give you some feedback on the comments that was made in the quotes. Matthew quoted actually Pythagoras saying, educate the children and it won't be necessary to punish the men. Well, Tanya also indicated it's Frederick Douglass indicated that it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. There's so many things. Alicia indicated creation of good social skills at an early stage promotes good social awareness and sense of responsibility. This cannot be underestimated. Kudos to Cotlands. The importance to start from a good foundation is extremely important. Thank you very much, Cotlands. We're going to play you quickly this 3-minute clip that it seems it's working now. Then we'll move over to the next stage. But this is exactly the reason why we as the ACFE is supporting Cotlands and the drive for the game. So we'll share more information in the upcoming Veritas that goes out. We'll share more information about this whole project with everyone at next year's Imbizo as well. There's a couple of things happening at the background. Get involved, get your companies involved. If you want more information, contact Amanda directly or us. We'll gladly share the information with you as organizations. I think this is a great tool that you can use to influence those within your organization as well as those at home. So don't only sponsor the game for Cotlands, which is very important, but also talk to your employer and buy the game from Cotlands so that they can then also use that funds to fund others. Let's have a look at the video. Thank you very much for this, Amanda. I'll share the questions later on with you. Let's see if this video clip works.
Okay, will you just mute me?
I'm going to, unfortunately, have to kick you off so that it works. Thanks.
Kick me off. Kick me off.
Sorry for that. We're going to share the video clip with everyone. That will be done, unfortunately. Sorry for that. That will be done via our Facebook as well as to all the delegates who registered here. So thanks very much for that. Chantal, sorry for kicking you off. It was a mistake. It was not done on purpose. Shall we continue then with Professor Rashid Small? In introduction of Rashid, he is the COFE executive of SIPA and is going to talk about one of the most financial schemes in cooking the books. professional accountants are best placed to help spot irregularities and fight fraud. So Professor Small is a professional educationist with experience in education, restructuring and curriculum development. He describes himself as a human capital developer and has left a deep footprint in the academia. Professor Small has held teaching positions such as associate professor, guest lecturer and educational trainer at institutions such as the Prince Sultan College of Tourism and Management and King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. He's also served as senior lecturer and head of financial accounting and coordinator of honors program at the University of Western Cape. Professor Small is passionate about the accountancy profession and how it should be shaping itself to meet the future of artificial intelligence as well as enhanced new technologies. He believes that sophisticated automation will and has already begun changing the way accountants fulfill their role. He maintains that accountants must become information users and knowledge producers. He is also a firm proponent of accounting professionals becoming expert users of the increasingly sophisticated software that is available, as he considers this to be the only way that they will be able to carve out a niche for themselves. Professor Small also sits on the ACFE Forensic Accounting Forum and has assisted us in developing the forensic accounting standards for those who want to specialize further. He is a supporter of holding people accountable and therefore also assisted us with the process. Rashid, it's always a pleasure having you here. I'm going to hand over to you so you can address all the members of all the different professions and the general public out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaco. It's always a pleasure to contribute to our primary responsibility as professionals, which is to serve the public interest. So if they can just play the slides for me. Thank you very much, Jaco. I'm going to speak about cooking the books. Now, cooking the books is an age-old concept which has gone as long as the profession exists. And I think in the current age, where information is the driver of the profession and decision-making, the quality and integrity of that information becomes even more critical than the financial statements which are presented. And like it was said earlier, the tone for fraud and corruption and addressing it should be set from the top. Unfortunately, the prevention of fraud and corruption, especially financial statement frauds, starts at the bottom. And that means that if you manipulate or cook the books at the lowest entry level of the information, then the information which is given through to the top will be inaccurate, unreliable, and incorrect decisions has been made. Now, accountants, unfortunately, like the news media, you have news, real news, fake news, and lies. Now, the accountants are in the same position in that particular area. Now, when cooking the books, it means that you are manipulating the information that lands up in the financial statements. So cooking the books results from falsification. It results from inaccurate classification, misrepresentation, and most importantly, fraud and corruption. Now, when you look at the role of fraud and corruption, it's normally only discovered at the end of the year when financial statements are audited or when financial statements are prepared. Now, when you look at fraud, the definition, you all know the definition, but it's where people are dishonest because they're going to benefit. Now, as an accountant, the principles that drives financial statements are, and the objectives of the financial statements are, you must provide useful information to make informed economic decisions. And that comes together with ensuring the qualitative characteristics of financial statements, which are twofold. One is relevance. Secondly, faithful representation. Now, when you look at fraud, you are misrepresenting the information, and that starts from the start of recording. Corruption is part of the whole process of ensuring the appropriate classification of information. And what SAIPA has done in their new competency framework is to state that the people at that low level of entering information are no longer just going to be data processors or bookkeepers. They're going to be elevated and have to develop new skills to ensure that they can become information auditors, to ensure the integrity and quality of the information that goes into the system will produce reliable, accurate, and trusted information in the financial statements. Now, when we look at that, and this is very important in terms of saying that most frauds and corruption is hidden because of misclassification. When I want to reduce my profits, I classify an asset as an expense. When I want to inflate my profits, I classify expenses as assets. Similarly, when I want to reduce my taxes, I apply tax legislation in an accounting environment which distorts the financial information. And this is what fraud is. But the most important part, and this is where the ethical part of professional accountants come into play, is that the financial accounting and reporting standards are based on the principles of substance over form. Now, substance over form requires a certain level of judgment to ensure that you are achieving what you want to achieve in terms of the objectives of the financial statements. Now, this is where, as was stated earlier, unauthorized, wasteful, and fruitless expenditure comes into place because they push it from an argument of substance over form. But this is where the professional accountant's ethical responsibilities must be heightened. Now, why is corruption and fraud important to professional accountants? And the most important reason is because professional accountants have a responsibility to serve the public interest. And to do that, when we do not play our role in detecting and preventing fraud and corruption, businesses go under because their resources are misappropriated. Business development, which drives economies, are weakened, which results in unemployment, dependent on government funding as grants, etc. But most important, it develops a culture of criminality within the profession. Also, we're supposed to provide and protect shareholders because we provide them with information. And if fraud and corruption are not detected by us as professionals, it means that they will lose confidence in the business and the financial reports. From a political perspective, it results in instability. We saw what happened in the unrest, and that was purely because of fraud and corruption, one of the factors driving it. But most importantly, in the public sector, it results in the lack of service delivery, which becomes so important because we may have a clean audit, but we're not fulfilling our responsibility to the public in rendering quality service delivery. So now I want to go on what causes fraud and corruption within the profession. The first is opportunity. There's an opportunity that I will not be detected and I can enrich myself by exploiting that opportunity. And to this extent, it's important to ensure that professional accountants minimize the opportunity created by ensuring that there is good governance and compliance to internal control to minimize risk. Secondly, pressure, peer pressure. If the tone from the top is not set properly, then fraud and corruption has grounds to flourish. And I think that is what we are trying to do, to avoid pressure, and that is where ethics becomes so important to professionals. Lastly is rationalization. How do we justify our dishonest behavior to become acceptable? And this is the role where SAIPA is playing together with the other professional bodies, is to start self-regulating its members to ensure that they will not rationalize dishonest actions to be ethical. Now, the fraud and corruption framework, like it was said earlier, starts with leadership. Leadership sets the tone within which fraud and corruption should be prevented, detected, and responded to for consequence management. Now, leadership is placed in a very challenging position within times of technology, and also where there's a greater need for innovation, creativity, and agilities to survive as businesses. And to ensure that that does not increase the level of risk, governance becomes an important and pivotal within the role that professional accountants and professionals within the accountancy profession does. And governance is not only what we do, it's how we do and what we are accountable and responsible for. And then lastly, legislation. Now, I always have the argument with professionals that compliance to legislation may not represent ethical behavior. And that for me becomes very important. So when you put all those together, and as a professional who has professional conduct responsibilities and ethical responsibilities, we will be able to detect fraud and corruption at the earliest possible stage, which is the entry level. Then we can put structures in place to prevent it, and we'll deal with those which have slipped through the cracks or through consequence management. Now, those were two quotes I want to give you about where the role of professional accountants play, is that the accountancy profession seeks to create an ethical framework to assist its members in speaking out when they identify fraud and corruption. So we must not only be brave to do the right thing when no one else is looking, we must always be brave enough to do the right thing even in the face of challenges. Secondly, corruption is a severe impediment to the sustainability of economic, political, and social progress for the country at all levels of development. This underscores the importance intensifying efforts to improve governance frameworks and strengthen the actions to improve the prevention, detection, and sanctioning of corruption. Those two, which should be part and ingrained into our DNA as professionals. We have our code of professional conduct, we have our code of ethics, but most importantly, to prevent fraud and corruption as professional accountants, we must try and achieve our first responsibility, which is to serve the public interest. And if we can serve the public interest, we can stand up and say that we took the responsibility and are prepared to face our accountability to the public. Secondly, is where we spoke about our ethical codes, objectivity, the fundamentals, etc. But most importantly, it boils down to the individual. They must be competent in terms of fulfilling their responsibilities, but also ensuring that they have the necessary skills to do the work and minimize fraud and corruption. The first thing of our role is to acknowledge that we are the custodians of financial information. And when you are the custodian of financial information, you become the trusted professional to ensure that the financial information is accurate, reliable, and that it can be used for the purposes that it is intended. And this starts not only from preparing financial statements, but from recording transactions at its lowest level. To do this, we need to make sure that we understand business, accounting system, and internal controls so that we can identify weaknesses that will facilitate fraud and corruption within the financial accounting arena. Being a skeptic in the work that you do means that you will be able to identify red flags indicating potential of financial statement frauds. Now, this for me is a very great concern because yes, we are professionals and we are professionals for years. And I think we need to look at whether we are conscious professionals, which means we are constantly alert and aware of what we're doing, or whether we are subconscious professionals, which means we have been doing it so long that we stop thinking about what we're doing because we think we know what should be done. And then we have those others who contribute to fraud and corruption, who I call the unconscious professionals. And that means we facilitate fraud and corruption. Now, how do we start identifying fraud and corruption as fulfilling our roles? Is by doing data analytics. And this becomes very important to ensure that we understand the stories behind the information that we are presenting. And then lastly, independence is a critical item that we need to have in terms of what we need to do and how we need to do stuff. And independence is one of those items that normally results in professionals being caught up in fraud and corruption and they don't know how to get out. Now, the role of the professional accountants, I'll give a step procedure in terms of what they do. The first is step number 1, assessing information, the quality, authorization, relevance, reliability of the contractual relationship between the information adding in. And that means that we must make sure that our accounting records satisfy the requirements of the International Financial Reporting Standards or the International Public Sector Accounting Standards. And that is classification, recognition, measurement at the recording stages, as well as measurement, presentation, and disclosure in the financial statements. And this is to identify fraud, we must ensure that we apply those. Now, when we go into the next phase, which means where we are doing now either assurance or non-assurance functions, means that we must make sure that when we do even non-assurance functions such as compilations, that it does not mean we have a responsibility to identify fraud and corruption. We have that responsibility because it impacts on the quality of the financial statements that we present. And that is, I always tell our members, when you put your signature to a set of financial statements, would you invest your house, your wife, your family in that particular set of financial statements? If you start doubting that investment, then you must know something is not right. So when we identify fraud, we have procedures to inform management about it for further investigation, and they may appoint you as a professional to do this particular investigation. From an assurance perspective, you have an even greater responsibility to ensure that you are able to detect financial statement frauds and corruption, detect material misstatements of the financial statements that will distort them. So yes, we have a full responsibility to identify and detect fraud and corruption. But whether we have a responsibility to dig deeper, yes, we do have. In some cases, when we report to management, they may appoint us, and we will then go and do much deeper work to understand whether fraud and corruption exists. But what we like to do is we try and hide behind materiality. And I always tell people, whether you steal 1 cent or R1 million, it's unethical, because stealing is unethical. And the last step is to evaluate the impact of fraud and corruption on the financial statements when formulating your engagement or your opinion, whether you're going to give a clean audit, whether I'm going to give a qualified audit, whether I'm going to give a disclaimer. And that is what we then need to look at. And lastly is just the process, is that information in fraud detection and prevention is critical. We need to gather information, investigate the information, identify potential risk and consequences, and then we need to respond to those risks and see how we can minimize that risk from occurring in future. And I just thought I'll put this as a last slide. We get a lot of funding into Africa and in South Africa in general, and the OECD has also protected themselves by putting in processes and procedures for fraud and corruption. And you can see is that they want a detection mechanism. When I give you funds, use it for the purposes that it is intended. Also, have a risk register to ensure that risks are addressed, but also to ensure that you take into account emerging risks as well as the risks within the organization as large. Data analytics is becoming critical because it's not the end result we're looking at. Quality management means we look at the entire process from the start to the end rather than just looking at the end result. Governance is important to them. And then also monitoring and evaluation to ensure that your fraud and risk management approach is still relevant in the environment in which you are operating. And that is what they have done. Other than that, this I've already discussed. Thank you very much, Jaco. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. But like I said, from SAIPO perspective, we have changed our competency framework to move towards an information broker, which adds value to businesses. And we are no longer just looking at the chief financial officer, but we're now also looking at the chief financial futurist, which means those that will be able to use information to make decisions about the future, to prevent fraud and corruption in future, because that would be indicators of the past. Thank you
very
Jaco.
much. Thanks, Rashid, for a great presentation. Everyone else has stated the same. Just want to find out quickly, will you be able to stay on for the Q&A session later today?
Yes, Jaco, no problem.
I've got a number of questions for SAIPA, which actually relates to SAIPA. So thank you very much for that. It says that you've touched the people's hearts, and I look forward to seeing you a little bit later on this session. Thanks, Rashid.
No, thank you, Jaco. It's always a pleasure dealing and doing stuff with you.
All right, I'm just
And
going to
your
switch off
organization,
to the normal viewer mode, so then I'll be able to continue. Thanks, Rashid. Great. Like everyone indicated, it's just from going great to greatness, and we've got brilliant speakers here today, and which we are very thankful for their participation. Another person that's very much involved in the Forensic Accounting Forum and a lot of other forums is Mike Bora. He's the Head of Education and Development South Africa from the ACCA. His topic he's going to talk a little bit about is that accountants need to raise the bar on fraud, ethics, and sustainability. Like I indicated, Mike works for the ACCA and is responsible for delivering the ACCA's education strategy in the region. He works in partnership with key stakeholders and regulators in the education sector, and is also an FCCA and former regional training consultant. He has been actively involved in development of the professional and the profession since his student days. So we are extremely happy having you here, Mike. You are also the former Public Accountant and Auditors Board in Zimbabwe board member and chairman of its Education, Training and Professional Development Committee. Mike is an observer on the IRBA Education Transformation Committee, and I can tell you I've been working with Mike now for a number of years. When Mike speaks, everyone listens. Thank you very much, Mike. I'd like to listen to what you have to say to us here today.
Thanks, Jaco, for those very kind words, and it's always a pleasure to be part of your forums. And thanks, colleagues, and always a pleasure to be joining you for today's event. So I would like to talk to you about a range of interconnected issues that influence the accountancy profession. And my title to do this is Accountants Need to Raise the Bar on Fraud, Ethics, and Sustainability. But first, I want to give you a quick overview of ACCA and then speak about the purpose of the profession and public value. This is a firm footing on which to start. I acknowledge upfront that previous speakers have covered some of this ground as well, so bear with me for the slight overlap, which is inevitable. So let's look at the ACCA. We have 233,000 members and 536 future members. And we are a family that operates across 178 countries from every continent. And all of our members and future members from all these different nations and languages are united by our common values and a devotion to the highest global standards. We are a force for public good. We lead the global accountancy profession by creating opportunity, and our values are inclusion, integrity, and innovation. And we have been around since 1904, and these values and this purpose is as true today as it was those 117 years ago. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, it will always be true. We do a lot of capacity building, and examples of this will include the capacity building we are doing in Rwanda, including nation building. It also goes into our focus on progressive topics in the profession, such as innovation in the public sector and the profession's contribution to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and social mobility. This is just an example of the commitment that ACCA has to the broader purpose of capacity building and nation building. As we slowly come out of the pandemic, our communities, our companies, and our countries will need the skills of professional accountants more than ever before. These accountants will need to be dedicated to the honest pursuit of sustainable business, to rebuild confidence and restore health in the wounded global economy. Doing this demands certain skills and abilities, working across organizations to deliver public value, which for ACCA means working in the public interest, promoting responsible and ethical business, and supporting sustainable economic growth. The credibility of the profession, ladies and gentlemen, depends on society recognizing the value that professional accountants bring in terms of promoting good governance, in facilitating sustainable access to finance for business, in applying the highest professional and ethical standards in our work. All of this is crucial to maintaining confidence in national economies, sustaining strong business performance, and creating long-term economic growth. It also means fighting fraud and being vigilant against it. We believe that professional accountants are essential to underpin economic success, bring a wider value to the public through integrity and high ethical standards. Now I want to turn to the issues around ethics and sustainability. As we all know, COP finished a few days ago. I wonder how many of us think that ethical decisions about sustainability were made at this event. In late October, just before the COP26 took place, ACCA published Climate Action and the Accountancy Profession, Building a Sustainable Future. This said organizations urgently needed to set net zero targets and the pathways to achieve them, and that good intentions are disconnected from the pace of climate action that is urgently needed. This could be seen, ladies and gentlemen, as an ethical conundrum that needs to be resolved. Leaders within the profession will have to balance many different considerations and paths as they prepare their organizations for this fundamental shift in how they think and operate. And as they do so, here are some immediate actions they can take. We need to get executive buy-in, and the tone set by organization leaders really matters. When it comes to climate action, play a lead role in supporting boards and executive leadership in net zero transition plans, which cover the strategies the organization will undertake to achieve net zero status by 2050 or preferably earlier. These plans should include key milestones that need to be achieved by 2030. Ensure that climate-related risks are fully integrated. I think it's essential that we move away from looking at sustainability and business strategy as two separate priorities. We need to integrate strategic and operational levels, leverage on on science-based targets where relevant to cover the organization's entire value chain and the use of its products and its assessment and decision-making. It's time to consider financial and non-financial reporting together so that organizations can account for their real value to society. The accountancy profession has developed robust and trustworthy assurance processes. These need to be adapted to integrate non-financial reporting. We need to educate and raise the level of knowledge and expertise among us all employees, and in particular, the finance teams, on the importance of sustainability and climate action. We need to do this, ladies and gentlemen, because scientists have been sounding the alarm about how climate change will reshape our planet for the last 25 years, unfortunately, without much success in terms of influencing either governments, business, and global society to act. However, the experience of the last few years and this most recent COP26 event is that the world is finally waking up to the need to act on the scientific research. There are a number of factors driving this, and I'll have a quick look at this. So, to deliver on climate change and net zero goals, governments are developing policies, enacting new laws, and enforcing them through more robust regulation. Aside from individual government action, several pan-global frameworks and initiatives are starting to reshape thinking and priorities when it comes to the climate emergency and wider sustainability concerns. The investor community is also proving to be highly influential in moving the world towards a post-carbon future by anticipating and, in a number of cases, reacting to government policy and regulation. What was once seen as a new trend is now part of the investment mainstream. Consumer pressure, opinion, and purchasing decisions are increasingly potent forces influencing how organizations approach climate and nature-related risks. And last but by no means least, the pandemic has had a massive impact on what is happening and why. This brings me to my concluding thoughts around ethics and sustainability. Accountants can bring much needed business skills and financial acumen, given their long established and respected auditing and ethical rigor to climate and nature-related impacts. This ethical rigor is essentially about doing the right thing in the right way. I don't really need to belabor this point. A lot of previous speakers agree with me, and we are basically singing from the same hymn. And this is essential to tackle fraud that can very often be a side effect of corners being cut and unethical behavior. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have identified ethics and sustainability as core capabilities. The profession needs to possess for now and the future, alongside others on this slide. This is so that we can create, protect, and sustain value. These core capabilities are identified in our report, Professional Accountants at the Heart of Sustainable Organizations. This research considers the future of the accountancy profession, a time for opportunity for finance professionals where they can make vital contributions to business and other organizations. This report emphasizes the role of business in society. Organizations large and small in the private and public sector will play an essential role in forging a better world for the longer term, beyond the ravages of the pandemic, and in dealing with the growing environmental emergency. The accountancy profession is an integral part of this. Accountancy professionals have a huge role to play. I mentioned at the start of this presentation that accountants need to raise the bar on fraud, ethics, and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my belief that we can do this to create, protect, and report on the value that society needs to build strong economies. Across the different roles that we perform, from audit and advisory, corporate reporting, financial and risk management, it's essential that we are all practicing the highest ethical and international standards in order to create investor transparency and protecting the public interest at all times. We are an essential part of this solution. And in closing, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that all the reports that I've covered in this presentation or mentioned are freely available on the ACCA website. Additionally, you are welcome to also download the ACCA Professional Insights app so that you get direct feeds whenever there is output from our Research and Insights team. Thank you for listening to me. I give you back, Jaco.
Thank you very much, Mike. As always, great having you here, great listening to you, and bringing it in line with the others. You play a huge role in South Africa and as well globally. Something that we support. I've got one or two questions for you. I just want to make sure, you're going to be available for the Q&A session at the end?
Yes, I will be.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Then I'm going to just move you to the normal screen first, and I'll bring you to the main stage again later. Thanks very much for a great presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that said, thanks very much for all the feedback, everyone. Yes, that's what this week's all about, and today's all about, talking about fraud and talking about corruption. Pat, you can activate your screen. Thank you very much for that. Looking good, Pat. Pat Semenya has held a number of leadership roles across various industries over the past 22 years. Prior to her role as the Chief Executive Officer at UMSA, she was the Director of ACCA South Africa, a leading global accounting professional body. You just heard Mike speaking from there. Prior to the ACC South Africa, Pat led the trade assets optimization function at Nestlé Professional South Africa. She joined Nestlé from Johannesburg Water, where she headed the City of Johannesburg billing portfolio. Prior to Johannesburg Water, Pat held various finance management roles in the manufacturing sector. She started her career as an audit intern at KPMG South Africa. Pat sits on two boards as a non-executive director and is driven by contributing towards a cause and builds a career on the value of leaving a legacy through education. She is passionate about inclusive and equitable quality education, the importance of promoting lifelong learning and transmitting adequate knowledge to not only to the next generation of professionals, but also inspiring others to discover their purpose and potential is high on Pat's agenda. She sits also in a number of professional forums, amongst others, the AEPF with me there, and like I indicated on some of the others. Pat, always great having you here. You will be having the stage and sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaco. Right. Good morning, delegates. And I just want to thank ACFE for affording us the opportunity to share on combating fraud through the risk lens. And I also just want to give a big round of applause to the speakers that spoke before me. They have really touched on the points that really are central to the sector. And I would try very much to hasten my presentation so that we do not repeat ourselves. And as it says that, you know, in literature, that the academics always want to put the point across through a different version, but then it still goes back to the same point. So the reality is that fraud follows opportunity and attacks weakness. It is important that organizations know where they are vulnerable and how to take control of fraud, because it can damage the organization's market confidence and public trust. The area of fraud risk management is increasingly attracting mainstream attention as various stakeholders begin to comprehend the negative effects of uncontained risk. In today's discussion, I hope to provide insights into fraud prevention, detection, and response. If you could move to the next slide, please. Let me try that. Okay, I managed to got that. So if we're looking, for example, at the prevention, right? In order to significantly impact fraud, it is essential to formulate a solid, comprehensive approach. Literature informs us that there are various components of comprehensive fraud risk management approach. These components range from diagnosing the vulnerability to fraud, detecting the gaps, recommendations of mitigating anti-fraud controls, and so forth. For the purpose of today, however, I'd like to focus on fraud prevention, which is about literally preventing fraud before it actually happens. And I know Professor Small touched a bit on that. Fraud detection, identifying fraud in an efficient manner, and fraud defense, which is basically the response. How do we make sure that when we've got proper evidence, we actually get to a point where we act on it and we make it accountable? So if, for example, we look at the detection side of it, it is important around how we look at the management framework. I think it is ultimately a top-down exercise. A top-down exercise in the sense that the leadership in any organization will lead this. Do we even have a fraud management strategy in an organization or a framework? Because if that's where the tone needs to be set. So you set a tone around, we've got certain principles as an organization around the prevention and the detection of fraud. And it is all pegged on the strategy and the risk management framework. And that on its own, should be aimed at detecting the potential gaps of anti-fraud controls in the processes of our business. Establish the risk profile of our organization by ranking them, because we come from different works in terms of our sectors and organizations, from small, medium, NGO, private, public, right? JC listed and so forth. And in that stance, our framework and in terms of hierarchy, they will differ. There will always be commonalities. Normally the commonalities are sort of like influenced by environmental factors, right? But then the risk framework needs to look at both the internal factors and the external factors. Do we have a culture of enabling continuous monitoring? Because it cannot just be a strategy document that sits and be documented and then it's just filed. How do we make sure that it becomes part and parcel of our business as usual? How do we make sure that we continuously monitor controls using technology, and especially in the times that we live in, where now a lot of work is remote? And as a risk professional, I would say that it has become more challenging for the risk fraternity to literally get into the space where they're able to prevent and detect, because it's about sometimes that human element where you have to engage and make sure that you get the kind of like the feel of the environment. You know, there is certain elements that from a personal psychological sphere that we look at when we are looking at risk analysis. But then in the now ways of the way we work, how does technology influence that? Are we equipped enough as organizations to make sure that we are able to prevent and detect? What technologies does it take? I know a lot of organizations probably put risk at the back burner because it's a question of investments from a finance perspective. It's a question of the behavioral direction or appetite of the leadership. And it's also around the risk appetite in the sector that they apply on. And this is, I think, a point that risk professionals need to really look at. How do we ensure that that risk culture is embedded in the way we do business? The next part that we need to look at, which is literally the last point really, is around the defense, the response. So we have found over the years that we could have these prevention strategies around detecting, preventing. The question then becomes, there's then the lack of effective corporate governance that seriously undermines any fraud risk management program. If it's not implemented and it does not become part and parcel of our strategy, it becomes problematic. I don't want to really go back and labor into the points that the previous speaker spoke around the mechanics around it. But the reality and what I really want to put forth today is that only meticulous and ongoing effort by an organization can protect itself against significant acts of fraud. An effective fraud risk management framework will enable an organization to have controls that first prevent the fraud from occurring, detect it as soon as the fraud happens, and respond effectively to fraud incidents. The question then becomes, how come then, if you've got all that in place and we still have ongoing fraud instances that we see going on in our country? The reality is around implementation and follow-up. And I think this is where the uptake of the risk management and fraud aversion culture comes in, where we need to make sure that it is embedded in the culture of our organization. So as leaders into our organizations, how do we then make sure that we first put risk management at the center of our business value chain? Because once you put risk management, irrespective of whether you're dealing with finance or marketing or so forth, the reality is that there is an element of risk that we could face, be it external, be it internal. And if we continue to make that and just a little element on our strategy, we will never get past the fact of ensuring that we detect and prevent risk and fraud from the instance. The other element is around, so you find out about this fraud that is happening. Do we have safe in outlets, for example, where whistleblowing outlets as they're typically known? Do we have safe outlets to actually go out and report safely? And then are those members that are reporting it, are they protected? And are they effective, those structures that we have? There's the one element that I think needs to be addressed. Is it a question of just looking at elements that are there, you report them, they're just the front, but then nothing happens? And what is the follow-up on that? Because that is important. If there is no consequences to the fraud that has been reported, the detection and the defense or the response perspective becomes useless because you don't follow up on what you set forth. And I would urge today that all organizations, as much as they've got a very clear plan in terms of the strategy, risk management and fraud management should be part and parcel of it, because in that there will be follow-up, and in that there will be consequence management. So, for example, I will give an example of the work that UMSA does. So we've got what we call the Center of Excellence, and within that division of our organization, it is where we actually provide risk maturity and risk culture assessment services. The objective of a risk maturity and risk culture assessment are to firstly identify the current and desired risk culture that can be articulated and modeled from the highest level in the organizations. Like I said before, set the tone from the top. The second part is to provide insights and recommendations through a roadmap or an improvement plan to assist in the embedding of the risk culture beyond the boardroom holistically into each of the business units or functional areas. As a follow-up phase, I mean, you can imagine that takes a long time, because firstly, there has to be a buy-in. And secondly, there has to be the appetite for adoption of risk management to avoid fraud. As a follow-up of the risk management maturity and risk management culture assessment and outcomes, There's a training roadmap that EMSA provides, where we identify the gaps that may be addressed by risk management training in the line with the culture and maturity outcomes. We develop a bespoke training specific to the gaps, training needs that deliver the training specific to the audience that are specific. So for me, I think, dear delegates, is that we can talk till kingdom comes around this fraud, this corruption, this. It will not be mitigated until such time we get to a point where the leadership in the country, within organizations, get to a point where they realize the impact of it. And the same way that we sell marketing to organizations around, if you do good marketing strategies, your organization is going to perform better. The same way where we sell sustainability, if your organization is seen as a corporate sustainable partner, this is how you're going to perform. Risk management is part and parcel. And I think the happenings of the previous year, 2020, actually made us aware that we are not ready as a people, as a country, as a world, for example, to mitigate going forward and having sustainable organizations. And if that's the case, till when are we prepared to then act reactively in terms of how we manage our businesses? Because part and parcel of sustainability talks to resilience. So if we are not building resilient organizations, how do we then intend to prevent the corruption and the fraud that comes? Like I said in my opening statement, that fraud and corruption follows weaknesses and follows opportunity. The trajectory that COVID-19 took us into, where we had to find ourselves having to literally move from one way of doing things into the other, opened a huge opportunity in terms of fraud, because all of us globally, we were kind of like pivoted into this world that was uncharted before, and then it was business as usual, but then we reacted instead of being ready. So prevention of fraud and the management of fraud through risk management talks to that. How do we then make sure and take the learnings from what we've seen in the last year and before, and what has been happening in the world? How do we make sure that we bring fraud into strategy? And I also believe that we need to look at it hand in hand with what King 4 corporate governance dictates around how do we then make sure that risk management and fraud prevention as part and parcel and element of risk management is embedded in our strategies as an organization. And I will just probably make a reference to the Steinhoffs of this world. If you think of the fraud and corruption that is alleged through the Steinhoff case, and then you think, hang on, we've had all these professional bodies during that time. We have risk management, we have the accountants, the auditors, and so forth. So the question then becomes to us as professionals, are we doing enough? Are we adopting enough? Are we actually implementing and practicing what we are preaching? Because I mean, in my involvement in this sphere, I've got to learn and realize that all of us have got standards and prescriptives and frameworks that talks to anti-corruption, anti-fraud, and ethics and sustainability. But then the question remains, how then do we then still find ourselves in a situation that we have the cases that we have in South Africa or globally? Then do we go back and look at how do we then combine and become a combined force to take up and enforce that? Part of it could be legislator, because we know in the South African context, there's an issue of legislated professional bodies and non-statutory or statutory, along those lines. So, and we know that if something is not legislated, actually for us to enforce it becomes secondary, right? So if we really want to be a force and a thought leader and an influencer in that space, where we are leading in the prevention of fraud for the benefit of South Africa and the economical growth that South Africa so desperately needs. How do we then bring together those forces and make sure that we approach the relevant bodies to make sure that we lead in that organization? And how do we also make sure that the community, the professional community within our sector actually adopts the reality of belonging to a professional body for the mere virtue of being regulated, being kept up to speed in terms of the occurrences in the future that can impact on their career and eventually impact on the work that they do, ultimately benefiting our economy. So with that, I will stop there, Yaku, and we'll take questions later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pat, for the session. The comments also flying in. I love what you've said. I'm not sure whether you need to unshare your presentation, or Anita, if you can help with that, please. You've said a lot of truths, and risk management is key to any fight against fraud. So I'll keep the questions. There's a couple of questions for you. I'll keep the questions for later, and we'll deal with it then. Thank you very much. Thanks, Pat. Bye-bye. Right, we'll just waiting for the next speaker to come onto stage. Our next speaker is Leon Townsend. Hi, Leon. Thank you very much for being here. Leon is one of our committee members, and I'll introduce him formally now. He's going to talk about, do your experts meet the standard and the expectations set for the required field of expertise? Now, Leon, his personal philosophy is that if we can make progress in small steps and lead by example over a long enough period, those around us will automatically benefit. His aim is to lead through the input and participation of his peers and colleagues, and enjoy a structured and organized working environment where everyone understands what is expected of them. Ethical behavior is non-negotiable, and see himself as the champion of his organization's values system, grounded on integrity, ownership, and professionalism. Why did he decide to qualify as a CFE himself? Belonging to a community of people with the same mindset and views about fighting fraud just felt right to him. He knew that there had to be a massive learning curve waiting ahead once he was a CFE, and looking back, his horizon has broadened beyond his expectations. The credibility that is associated with the qualifications, just the cherry on top. Leon serves as the vice chair of the Gauteng Regional Committee. He sits on our standard forum as well as some of our other forums. He's a vivid reader. I always see him at sport field, so he loves his rugby, as well as he's always there to stand in and help out with being a speaker at our events. So he's been speaking at the regional and national level. So thank you very much, Leon, for being here today. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Yaku, for the opportunity and the introduction. As Yaku said, I do participate in the standard forums, and it's my pleasure this morning to discuss with you the topic of, do your experts meet the standards and expectations set for the required field of expertise? We've heard from various professional bodies this morning, and I gather you've also heard that there's a golden thread amongst most professional bodies. And so some of the stuff I'm going to be saying will be repeated, but it just shows the importance of that in our aim to build public trust as professional bodies. So I encourage you as an organization today, whether you are public or private, to measure your anti-fraud expert against the standards that I will be discussing today in this session. As an ACFE member, we are committed to, and obviously guided by, a professional code of ethics. You've heard most of the professional bodies view and hold as one of their cornerstones their code of ethics. It's impossible to be a professional body if you don't subscribe to a code of ethics, and certainly the ACFE is not an exception there. And then secondly, the ACFE also has a professional standard, which was adopted by the ACFE Board of Regents on 1 November 2020. And to date, the ACFE SA chapter has established, 6 forums to discuss fraud issues relevant to their needs, and obviously each one with their own objectives. Now, I quickly want to share these forums with you. They are the Anti-Intimidation and Ethical Practices Forum, the Cyber, Forensic Accounting, Forensic Industry Standards, Healthcare, and Intelligence Gathering Forums. Now, these forums meet every quarter, and they are member-driven, which I think is very important. So the participation is driven by members. The chairperson is a member, and they are supported by the ACFE South African chapter. So what do they aim to achieve? First of all, the aim, and I think it's an aim through all these forums, whether, does not matter what methodologies are discussed, is to standardize and regulate their scientific methodologies. Obviously, in the course of their own investigations, depending on the type of forum they're discussing. Foremost of these standards are, are that they are guided. Many of them are guided by international standards. We're well aware of that there are international standards that predicts or dictates that certain scientific methodologies should follow their standards. However, in our forums, we do make changes, obviously in the context of applicable legislation, legal systems, and frameworks of the Republic of South Africa, and also in all other African chapter countries where the ACFE is present. A second key part of these forums is to establish the minimum qualification, knowledge, and experience required to be assessed as competent in these specific scientific methodologies. It's no use that we have professional standards, but we don't have the competition that goes with that. So these are a very important part of the process. And obviously, this all happens, as I said, whilst we are guided by the ACFE standards of professional conduct. The ACFE is recognized as a professional body. I'm sure most people on this call know that. And the ACFE holds its members to the highest level of ethical conduct. We've heard, once again, from all the professional bodies and the speakers this morning, that ethics is a cornerstone to most of them. And, the ACFE certainly views that as a critical part of the organization. Our members have a professional responsibility to their clients, the public interest, which you've heard as well before today, and towards each other. And that's a responsibility that requires subordinating your self-interest to the interest of those that you serve. And this code is really applicable to all members, whether you're a regular member or an associate member. All of us are subject to these codes. The professional standards address 4 main categories, namely professional conduct, professional care, examination, the actual investigation part of it, and then obviously the reporting of the examination. So if we can start with professional conduct, what does it require of the ACFE member? The ACFE require us to have the utmost integrity and objectivity. It's critical for our members not to sacrifice their integrity to serve a client or employer, or public interest, knowing that public trust is founded on integrity. Without that, a professional body does not have a reason to exist. Then going on to professional competence, our members should be competent, as I said earlier, and should not accept any assignments where their competence is lacking. And then thirdly, moving on to professional care, due professional care requires diligence, critical analysis, and professional skepticism in discharging your professional responsibilities. At the beginning of a fraud examination, certified fraud examiners and other members should reach an understanding with those that are retaining them, whether it's a client or an employer, about the scope and limitations of the fraud investigation. Those are very important parts of the standard. Continue on with professional care, and specifically with regards to communication. So what information should be communicated to the people that retain us in what we do? Significant findings made during the normal course of investigation is key. CFEs should not disclose confidential or privileged information obtained during the course of their fraud examination without the express permission of a proper authority, or whether it's their client or employer or a government authority. Going on to examination, the professional standards for examination. CFEs are required to be very objective when they obtain evidence and information, and that information should be complete, reliable, and relevant. Very important: complete, reliable, and relevant. We are also cognizant of the chain of custody, including the origin, possession, and disposition of relevant evidence and material. We strive to preserve the integrity of the relevant evidence. Then going on to the reporting side of our standards, CFE's reports shall be based on evidence that is sufficient, relevant, reliable, and supports the facts, conclusions, opinions, and recommendations related to the fraud examination. Nothing else, nothing less, nothing more. And then, very important, no opinion shall be expressed regarding the legal guilt or innocence of any person or party. I want to share with you those standards that we have completed in the standard forums. It took us a few years of many meetings and collaboration and hard work, but we're proud to say that we've completed these 6 standards that we are displaying now. First of all, digital forensic standard, health fraud examiner standard, forensic document examiner standard, the forensic standards for polygraph examiners, layered voice analysis, and voice stress detection. As you can see, these are all very technical and scientific standards that has been completed, and I encourage you to go to the ACFE SA website. They're all published there, and they've been signed off and accepted, and it might be good for your own knowledge and experience to explore what these standards have in them and how they could be of assistance when it comes to expert knowledge and experience and using an expert in fraud examination. There are 2 standards that are currently in the process of being finalized. Forensic accounting, obviously a critical and key one in our ACFE member base. And then also the standards for whistleblowing management and systems and their providers in South Africa. Every year, the ACFE internationally bring out a report to the nations, and consistently it's reported that whistleblowing is the key methodology of highlighting fraud and corruption and white-collar crime across the world, and is a great source for investigators in resolving these matters and eventually prosecuting people successfully. If you have any contribution on these standards and you want to participate, please reach out to the ACFE SA and see how you can get involved whilst these standards are being processed. Then there are some standards and academic frameworks that are open for comment at the moment. The health fraud examiner framework, academic framework, is open for comment. And then pen testing, that's cyber security related, is open for comment. So I really ask, if you have expertise in this field and you are an ACFE member, please reach out and make a contribution or comment on that. And then currently standards that are being processed and drafted, forensic fire investigators, a very important one for especially insurance companies, fingerprints, anti-money laundering, a very big one, and then accident reconstruction. So Once again, if you have the expertise to participate, we encourage you to join us in finalizing these standards. Ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard from this session, the ACFE regulates its members through a code of ethics, professional standards, and have established standard forums through which investigation methodologies are standardized. Furthermore, these ACFE forums establish professional conduct, professional care, professional examination, and professional reporting standards with the aim to build public trust. In conclusion, if you obtain the services of a certified fraud examiner or any other ACFE member, your organization can rest assured that you employ an expert measured against the highest professional standards. I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Leon, for a great presentation. From the comments, it was clear that people support better regulation, as well as looking at holding people more accountable. So, with that said, and you being the second last speaker, you will be available for the Q&A session, I assume. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to, if you can just stop screen share on your side, then I'll introduce the last speaker, and then I'll take you to the normal screen, and I'll call you up a little bit later. There's 2 or 3 questions for you. Thanks very much for that, Leon.
Thank you, Jaco.
Thanks for that, and then it brings us to the last speaker that's going to present today. Thereafter, we're going to go over to a Q&A session where we will call everyone up again just to give final comments, as well as to address 1 or 2 of the questions that we've got time for. So the next person who's going to talk for us is Imre Nagy. He's the CEO at IRBA, and his topic is going to be fraud. What role do auditors play in protecting company shareholders and the public? Mr. Nagy has 20 years experience in the auditing profession, with the last 9 years dedicated to auditing regulation. He gained extensive experience in performing audits, quality management and controls, accounting, risk management, forensic audits, and public sector advisory. Most of his career has been serving the public sector and public interest. And he has a deep-rooted passion for the auditing profession and the important role that it plays in the country's financial reporting ecosystem. Imre was appointed as Director, Inspections at the IRBA in February 2013, where he leads the regulatory monitoring and remediation function of registered auditors in South Africa. Before joining IRBA, his professional career spanned several small to large auditing firms. His last position before joining the regulator was regional or provincial lead partner for the 5th largest audit network firm in South Africa. He is an independent quality technical advisor to the Auditor General of South Africa Quality Control Assessment Committee, and has been since 2013. On the international front, he was appointed as an International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators board member in 2020, and currently chairs the Audit and Finance Committee of IFIAR. Imre, thank you very much for being here. Always great listening to you. You've been a regular speaker for the ACFE, and I know you are passionate about the audit profession. So thanks for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I would like to thank you, Jaco, to you and your team and the ACFE for hosting the Fraud Awareness Day. And thank you for inviting me as a speaker. It was also a privilege to listen to the rich insights of all the esteemed speakers at the event this morning. And yes, of course, a big thank you to all the delegates for investing time from your busy schedules to attend. As the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors in South Africa, We fully support international and local fraud awareness events such as this one today. It is critical in the current environment, especially for people to understand the risks and the impact of fraud in a society and in a country's economy. It is specifically important to actively promote anti-fraud awareness and share information on the systems and responsibilities of relevant role players in combating fraud. So today I will talk to you about the role of auditors in protecting companies, shareholders, and public. So it's very focused on the role of the auditor, the external auditor to be precise. And I hope to promote a better understanding of where external auditors fit into the picture and what their role and responsibilities are in the ecosystem. I'm just putting my presentation up quickly. Okay, so high-profile corporate failures created a global crisis of confidence in the financial reporting and governance ecosystem globally, and South Africa is by no means any exception to that. It brought into sharp focus the responsibilities and duties of management, those charged with governance, auditors, and even regulators. And these adverse events triggered an increased investor expectation for all role players to do better or even do more to prevent and expose corporate failures, to protect shareholders and the investing public. There's a seemingly an insufficient general understanding of the lines of defense and the scope of an external audit in terms of the current auditing standards. There are several role players in the financial reporting chain, each with a unique responsibility to contribute to sound financial reporting that can be trusted by users to make appropriate financial decisions. When there's a corporate failure that shocks the market, so an unexpected corporate failure, fingers are often pointed to the external auditor first for missing the fraud or not exposing it. In essence, alleging an audit failure. So you have a corporate failure and then there's an audit failure. But in recent times, those who committed or allowed the fraud in the first place are coming under increased criticism and scrutiny. And I believe this is a good development as it exposes the root cause of failures due to fraud by focusing first and foremost on the actions and the decisions of the company's appointed stewards. This presentation focuses at a high level on the external auditor's role with regards to fraud in the financial reporting chain. So who is responsible for fraud prevention and detection in a company? So from an external audit perspective, the International Standards on Auditing, ISA 200, assigns the primary responsibility to preparers, management boards, audit committees, in other words, those charged with governance, who are primarily responsible to implement controls that would prevent and detect fraud and ensure fair reporting. In terms of the extant auditing standards, the external auditor's obligation is a secondary responsibility, which means that auditors are not primarily responsible for detecting fraud, but they do have an obligation to consider the impact of fraud in the financial statements audit by obtaining a reasonable level of assurance, which is not 100% level of assurance, but nevertheless a high level of assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement due to fraud. So in the combined assurance model, and I'm sure you would have seen this model in previous presentations, but there are many levels of responsibility, and these are also known as the lines of defense. So at a grassroots level, firstly, you have the transaction initiators that are involved in the day-to-day running of the business, the strategy of the business, and the accounting of the business. And this is your management and the preparers of financial information. And overseeing management are the boards, the audit committees, who in turn appoint and oversee the internal auditors and external auditors. Regulators such as the RBA and other regulators in the ecosystem also play an important part in this model. One of the RBA's key strategic projects in South Africa is to help restore confidence. And the objective of this strategy is to identify gaps in this ecosystem and to recommend strengthened regulatory oversight that will improve the quality and reliability of reported financial information and audits. I think Pat also mentioned, that there's gaps in the system and there's legislation, etc., that needs to be looked into to find where are these gaps and what can we do as a country to plug these gaps and make sure that the ecosystem becomes better and stronger. So let's have a look at the external auditor's definition of fraud. So again, the International Standards on Auditing, ISO 240, defines fraud as an intentional act by one or more individuals among management, those charged with governance, employees or third parties, involving the use of deception to obtain an unjust or illegal advantage. Although fraud is has a very broad legal concept, for the purposes of the ISAs, from an external audit perspective, the auditor is concerned with fraud that causes a material misstatement in the financial statements. So it's very specific to the financial statements and the reliability of financial reporting. There is no doubt that external auditors play an important role in the financial system by performing external audits. While the standards do not extend to expect auditors to detect fraud, there is a strong call on auditors to do better and to do more in terms of the current standards. For example, by applying more professional skepticism in their dealings with management and when they assess management reports, assumptions, and decisions. To assist auditors to be more effective in dealing with fraud, the RBA issued a staff audit practice alert in June 2020, titled A South African Perspective on the Auditor's Consideration Relating to Fraud. The guide touches on a number of key elements that I'll highlight. For example, creating an audit environment that is conducive to identifying fraud. So the auditor must be in tune with the environment and with the client and understand the processes and the culture and the tone at the top, etc. Building an element of unpredictability into audit procedures, and to be on the lookout for information or actions that is inconsistent with information obtained during the audit. Also to be wary of intimidation and limitations imposed by management, and to corroborate the relevance and the reliability of information received from management. Also very important and an emerging topic is the involving of relevant specialists or experts where needed in the audit. For example, involving forensic specialists in various stages of the audit process. And lastly, to review and follow up on internal investigations. Obviously, if there's internal investigations, it gives a good picture of what's happening within the organization around the controls, etc., and what has happened. Were there instances of fraud that were identified, and is it dealt with decisively? So I included a link to this guide in a slide somewhere in the slide deck called Useful Links, should you wish to peruse it in more detail. The International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, the IAASB, also responded to calls on auditors in relation to fraud. And they issued a discussion paper on fraud and going concern titled The Difference Between Public Perceptions About the Role of the Auditor and the Auditor's Responsibilities in a Financial Statement Audit. Comment papers from various stakeholders around the world included recommendations that may enhance the role and effectiveness of the auditor when identifying and responding to fraud risk. For example, incorporating forensic specialists and training on forensic methodologies and skills, increased professional skepticism, increased transparency on fraud work in the auditor's report, etc. A draft fraud project proposal is on the December IAASB agenda for approval, and we'll keep an eye out for what's coming out of that after December. But as the IRBA in South Africa, we've also subsequently issued an exposure draft on enhancing auditor reporting to provide more transparency around fraud procedures in the key audit matters section of the auditor's report. That's currently still on exposure draft, and comments are being looked into. I again included a link to these papers within the slide deck. So as you can see, there's quite a lot happening internationally and locally regarding the auditor's role on fraud, and that's not all. In December 2020, which doesn't seem too long ago, but yes, it was almost a year ago, the RBA, the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, the ISBA, and the IAASB jointly released a publication named Navigating the Heightened Risk of Fraud and Other Illicit Activities During the COVID-19 Pandemic, including considerations for auditing financial statements. We are very proud as the RBA to have issued an international paper jointly with the international standard setters, and it's a testimony to the status of the RBA internationally. The publication highlights the heightened risk of fraud arising from the disruption and uncertainties around COVID-19 and the environment that COVID-19 created, and the implications of this on professional accountants in business, including accountants in governments and professional accountants in public practice, including auditors. So again, there is a link in the slide that you can follow and have a look at this paper as well. It is also published on the IAASB website. From a local perspective, the risk landscape has changed significantly due to COVID. In South Africa, we were all impacted by it, and there's an increased opportunity for fraud all the time, which from an auditing perspective requires a heightened awareness and action to be taken, because new realities and expectations were created, and it created a more challenging environment for the financial ecosystem. And the COVID is but one of the elements that drives fraud or gives rise to the possibility of fraud. So to summarize from a more broader level, a more broader perspective, as professional guardians of sound financial reporting, auditors and those agents appointed to manage and oversee businesses on behalf of their shareholders should recognize their roles and responsibilities and perform their duties with due competence and diligence to create a credible, trustworthy ecosystem that stimulates investment and growth. On the other hand, we also have consequence management, which is very important. And we're seeing an increase and a rise in consequence management and action, whereby those that failed in their duties are held to account. We see more and more media coverage on this aspect when there's an unexpected corporate failure than ever before. And the general public is becoming much more informed than ever before, creating a public expectation that cannot be ignored. I'm closing by sharing with you this very important slide. Obviously, 15 minutes isn't much, but I hope that I could leave the delegates with something to go back on and read up on. But here are some of those useful links that I mentioned in my previous slides that might be of interest to you. So you can just follow these links in the slides by clicking on it. I thank you, Yaku and ACFE for inviting me, and thank you also to the delegates for investing your time in attending the session. I trust that you found it of value and that you found the entire event to be of value. I certainly did, and thank you very much and goodbye. Yaku, back to you.
Imre, thank you very much. It's not goodbye yet. We are going to move over to a Q&A session. So what I've done is I've asked some of the delegates or the previous speakers to also be part of a Q&A session. Some of the questions that I'm going to pose relates to what you're going to talk about. And just spoke about. Yes, 15 minutes is not a lot, but it gives enough guidance to our members. And when I say our members, I'm not talking about ACFE, I'm talking about all our members, the different professional bodies, and the general public who's standing here today. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to kick off with you being here, and then I'll move over to some of the other speakers also, and some of their questions also would relate to you. So when we talk about auditors, how often do they get audited, and who decides on who audits who? Maybe if you can just answer that question.
So Jaco, just to get it clarity, are you asking who's auditing the auditors?
Yes, the question is, how often do auditors get audited by IRBA, and who decides on who they need to audit?
Okay. Very good question. I guess it talks to the regulatory approach and methodology. So obviously as a regulator, it starts with you set standards. So we in South Africa adopt international standards. If you want to become an auditor, you have to follow a rigid training regime. You have to write exams to make sure that you're competent in terms of those standards. And then at that point, an auditor is allowed to go to audit. So once an auditor joins an audit firm, excuse me, they have to abide by the standards, and they obviously issue the opinion. And there's an expectation by the public and the users of the financial statement that the opinion is done in terms of the international standards. As a regulator, we do regular inspections of audit firms, both at a firm level, to see what policies and procedures they implemented in terms of the international quality management standards, to make sure that they have a system of control to make sure quality audits are performed. As a regulator, we also do regular inspections of individual audit partners, registered auditors in this instance. So we pick a sample based on a risk. So we follow a risk-based approach. So we would, based on risk factors, select a number of audits within an audit firm from different partners. We would pull those audit files, and we would perform an inspection on those audit files, and we report back to the firms, as well as to the individual partners. And it's a rigid process that the regulator follows with, we have an inspections committee that looks at the findings and the issues picked up during an audit. We also allow the auditors to comment, and our final report is then issued to the firm to drive remedial action as part of the firm's ongoing process of remedial action, which is catered for in the standards. We also, as a regulator, have rigid disciplinary processes. So, for example, if there's evidence that an auditor did not perform their duties with due care, and there's misconduct elements present, and that could be either picked up through an inspection or through a complaint, the auditor will be investigated and disciplined in terms of the disciplinary rules of the RBA. So I tried to just give you a bit of a broader answer on that, but how we select files and firms, it's on a risk basis, and also our Act requires us to at least once every 3 years inspect an audit firm that performs a public interest entity audit.
Great. Thank you for that. There's a question that links to one of the questions also posed to you, Imre, that was posed to Rashid and to Mike. So this I'm going to link you two into this as well after Imre actually responded. What's your opinion on external auditors not rotating as often as they should when it comes to their clients? And then added to that is, when an auditor also acts as a consultant, this also relates to bookkeepers or accountants. If they do an audit as well as work as a consultant to a firm, for instance, providing payroll for the organization, can this be allowed?
So, Jaco, we're dealing with two questions, two principles here. One is independence and objectivity. And then the second issue is around non-audit services, which also links to independence and objectivity. I'll try to give a quick answer on both. So the RBA, and even in our Companies Act, it's very clear, there's clear prohibitions on the auditor. If you have a look at section 90, subsection 2 in the Companies Act, there's certain services that an auditor of a company cannot perform. For example, there's a conflict of interest. An auditor can't mark his own homework. You can't prepare financial statements. That's management's responsibility. But as an auditor, you can't do both those things. For example, be the internal auditor or do the financial statements and then audit your own work. That's not allowed. It's also not allowed in terms of the ethics code of conduct for auditors. There's strict prohibitions and strict rules around the independence of the auditor, because independence of the auditor is at the heart of the profession. If an auditor is not independent or even seen to be independent, it is possible that there could be biases in that the auditor don't see or don't report on issues in terms of, as an external auditor, on issues picked up in the company. So the issue of independence and rotation of auditors is important. The RBA has a strict view around firm level rotation every 10 years at least, because there's that familiarity that if an audit firm, even through their client relationship, has a relationship with an audit client for a very long time, you might find that over time that relationship impacts the objectivity and the bias of the auditor. On the second item, non-audit services, section 90, I did address that, but yes, there's a rule. There's a rule that's in the Companies Act already, and also in our code of conduct for auditors to not do those services on rotation. There's also a rule that was issued by the RBA back in 2017. And we have a deadline of the 1st of April 2023 in South Africa, whereby auditors of listed companies cannot be the auditor of that listed company for more than 10 years. That kicks in on the 1st of April 2023. So clients and auditors must look out and make sure that they comply. We've seen almost half of audits of listed companies already rotated. Listed companies on the JSE already rotated their auditors in the last 2 to 3 years in preparation and to comply with the rule that is kicking in April 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Imre. So from a accountant perspective, Mike, if you can also just comment on the question posed about fulfilling consultant and auditing bookkeeping functions, and then I'll hand over to Rashid and ask you to also a further question to that.
Thanks, Jaco. Firstly, let me also add my voice to the question around audit firm rotation. ACCA was one of the professional bodies that actually wrote to Parliament during the consultation phase, and we agreed with EBA. We felt that this was in accord with international best practice and also the principles around independence, which my colleague is correctly and very clearly articulated. So I don't have to bore you with that, but it is ACCA's position that audit firm rotation is the right way to go. Right. The second part is around the principle is conflict of interest. and you really cannot review your own work. And I think that is important. So we need to ensure that we abide not only with the guidance in the rules and regulations, especially around ethical conduct, around avoiding conflict of interest, but we have to abide by the spirit thereof as well. So our view as a CCA is you should not in any way find yourself in areas where there is clearly a potential conflict of interest. And if I go back to the discussions we've been having all along, I think it goes back to the basic rules around what is right and acting in the public interest. I think as fellow professionals, those should be the guiding principles. If it doesn't look right, it probably shouldn't be done. And it doesn't matter whether others are looking or not. You need to be living and be an example of how the best standards would be applied. Thanks, Jaco.
Rashid, I think you are going to concur with Mike, so I want to give you a more technical other question, which also actually goes back to the accountants and auditor profession. One of the university professors wrote a question, she's also a member of the ACFE, asking, should modules of fraud not be part of all accountants' curriculum and auditors' curriculum? Now, how do they really protect the public if that's not part of what they need to know and need to deal with on a day-to-day basis? They deal every day on issues of accounting, but they don't really deal with the fraud issues and the different types of fraud scams that's out there. What is your feeling about that?
Jaco, I think it's very important, and we at CYPA have taken that into consideration into our new competency framework. And the reason why we have done that, Jaco, is that we have accepted that the currency of modern day is information, and not financial currencies, it's information. And information, especially when you start moving into the value of information, the quality and integrity becomes extremely important. And what we have done is we have stated that from your entry into the profession, up until you qualify as a professional, it becomes extremely important that you understand fraud, corruption, and risk. And therefore, what we have done is, from the first year of accounting, you are made aware of risk, fraud, and corruption. And therefore, I don't believe that it should be a standalone module. It must be integrated into your entire learning process into becoming a professional. And therefore, in that case, you will play a much more important role of ensuring that you detect and prevent fraud to ensure that you achieve quality and information of integrity that can be used by decision makers. And I think in most cases, decision makers base their decisions on information. And if that is not accurate and reliable, consequences of those decisions only come out afterwards when fraud is investigated. So for me, in an information age, in a technology age, fraud and corruption must be incorporated from the time you enter the career as a professional in the accountancy profession, Jaco. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it actually answers the question, and another question that was posed, is there a need for forensic accountants? Should all not have the knowledge and the obligation to detect and report fraud within the accounting sphere? So, yes, I think that does answer the question on that. Mike, you're also part of the forum. Just shortly your opinion on that, and then I'll ask another question to Rashid and then to Philip.
Thanks, Yaku. We believe that all professionals have an obligation, but the ACCA view is that forensic accounting is an area of specialization, and while the principles and processes and procedures that can be applied in order to raise awareness and skepticism are adequately covered in the core training for accountants, the actual forensic aspects are not as broadly or adequately covered. So our guidance to fellow professionals is that in addition to your designation as a professional accountant, depending on the professional body that you belong to, we recommend strongly that you then proceed to build an additional layer of specialization so that you become an expert in forensics, if you so choose. And to give an analogy of this, Yaku, I would look at the medical profession, right? When you train to become a doctor in your initial years, you will become a GP. After your initial housemanship, and you then choose to do any area of specialization, take, for example, surgery. You can't say that because you were taught how to, treat a patient who has received a cut, which you can do in your surgery, you then become fit to operate in a theater. No, if you want to be a surgeon, you need to undertake the additional training. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I agree 100% with you on that point. Before going to your question, Philip, I want to ask you, Rashid, your opinion. Many bookkeepers or accountants are unregistered with no accountability afforded to them because of that. They're not registered with any professional body. How can we really change this within the public and private sectors so that we can hold people accountable and we can get those acting as accountants to belong to professional bodies? So that's the first part of the person's question. And the last one is, if a person has been found guilty, we don't see any accounting bodies really advocating or announcing the people who's been found guilty's names. There's no name and shame taking place on a public forum. How do we really protect the public if we do not come forward and say this person has been found guilty for dipping their fingers themselves into the cookie jar?
Thank you, Yaku. I think the first question I'll answer and to say that for me, for too long, professional bodies has focused on the highest tier, which is your professionals. And for me is that we need to start looking at professionalizing people from the bottom tiers as well. And by doing that, we will ensure that we can regulate the entire profession to ensure that everyone with performing functions within the profession becomes accountable. And I think there's a global move now that is pushing for accounting technicians and the recognition of accounting technicians as professionals. And I think that is starting to address that particular area which you spoke about, trying to hold bookkeepers and accountants accountable for their responsibilities. And yes, that is what we are doing. We have, in fact, restructured our competency framework to have 4 tiers that we want to regulate, from your bookkeeping entry right through up until your professional and also specialist area. The second question that you asked, Jaco, about publicizing those who are committing fraud or are guilty of misconduct, we have a responsibility in terms of our SMO towards IFAC that we need to publish on our websites or in other areas of members who are found guilty of misconduct. And we have done so, and we have published that. And I think we also have the agreement within the profession whereby we pass on that information to avoid professionals who are guilty of misconduct, what I call professional body jumping. I've been found guilty by ACFE, so now I'm going to a cyber, ACCA, etc. And I think we need to work that much more effectively to address our responsibility and accountability to the public.
Thank you very much for that. I want to move over quickly now to you, Philip. What roles do RGAs play to hold people accountable and charge them, if any?
Extremely well. I mean, we had a lot of comments.
Rashid, I'll just mute you here. So why is there a lack of consequence management when discovering of irregular expenditure can be proven? That's another question for you. You spoke a lot about consequence management. You spoke about irregular expenditure. So if you can just quickly sum up, what's the role that RGAs play to hold people accountable and charge them, as well as why is there a lack of consequence management in your belief? You need to just unmute yourself, Philip.
Yeah. All right. No, thank you, Iago. In terms of our own members, we do hold our members accountable. So there's a strict disciplinary process that we follow, and we make sure that we act swiftly. So and one of the things is that's why we're so strict. None of our members have been found in the, for example, the state capture processes. And also I think like just to adding back to the previous questions that you asked there, the other members here, is that there's just a general lack of many professional, let me say not even professionals, accountants who are out there and who are not really regulated. Internal auditors also is also a big part of them who are auditors, but they are not really regulated by anyone. So there is a whole lot of also, that's why there's a whole lack of accountability in the profession generally. And just going back to say our role is also similar, that we want to bring a lot of auditors and accountants which are not really regulated into the fold through our training programs. And we really have went to at length to be at partnership with your SALGA, for example, in this case, Treasury, so that we bring them into the fold, so that that level of accountability is also there. I think that the second part of the question, relating to irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, unauthorized, in my view, is just a lack of political will in the sector, and also oversight that is not being done. We've got enough laws, and PFMA and MFMA is quite clear what you need to do when there's financial misconduct, what you need to do with irregular expenditure and fruitless, you need to recover it. So I said this not being recovery because of lack of political will and oversight. And once we can change the culture at that level through us as professionals, which is more, for me, it's more obviously make sure that we highlight those issues. Secondly, we should also make sure that there's a lot of advocacy that we do. A lot of the time as professional bodies, yes, our members are in the field, but we also need to make sure as professional bodies we do a lot of advocacy in terms of making sure that there's accountability. So there's a lot of silence that I think professional bodies have, which I think it can be improved, so that we can be able to either, to say lack of better word, to irritate those who are charged with governance, so that we can see movement in that case. So firstly is the culture. Secondly is that as professional bodies, there's a whole lot of role that we can play to make more. The money that is disappearing through the system is accounted for.
On that, Philip, and having worked in the municipalities, on government and provincial levels, you yourself, And before I answer Alicia's comment as well, there was a question posed by someone. Will it not help appointing CFEs at municipalities to combat fraud, or people with the necessary experience and skill sets that understands fraud? We've seen how low the level was of municipalities complying recently when the audits report came out. So what's your finding on or what's your opinion on that one?
Yeah, yes, I think it will help definitely, because what we found is that obviously irregular expenditure and fruitless and useful expenditure, for example, it's one of those things that if you need to dig deeper and see if these people who have benefited directly from that. So the lack of skills in various departments and municipalities in terms of CFEs, obviously is a big gap, because you can do a forensic investigation, but if you're not adequately skilled to probe a certain question and obviously analyze the document to a point that you can be able to get to a point whether there's any direct benefit from those who are issuing this type of tenders and so forth. So I think definitely there's a whole lot of good that can be done by appointing CFEs in government, so that you can expose the maladministration issues, especially when
Philip, I want to add to that comment and just address, maybe as a closure for this group's session, the comment that was made by Alicia is it appears as if auditors are being used. Now, this is internal and external auditors, but I know the internal auditors are complaining exactly about the same thing on their profession, are being used to conduct act as forensic investigators, almost as if being an auditor per se is sufficient to perform the job. If that was the case, then you will know that there's a lot of international cases being brought against audit firms and auditors who did not detect fraud as they were supposed to, or did not report as they were supposed to. So the question is, and this is a comment from my side, I don't think it's a thing of we giving everything to the auditors. That's exactly why the King 4 was written, bringing in your fraud examiner also as a professionalized field of expertise, so that we jointly can provide the necessary assurance for organizations and can see how the one can work with the other. Usually audit teams consist out of various individuals. It consists out of accountants, it consists out of your investigators, it consists out of even cyber experts, etc., etc. So I don't think it's a thing of us saying that being in a profession like an accountant or auditor is the be-all and end-all. It's more to say that when you want to appoint someone to do a specific job within an organization, make sure that the person has the skill sets required to do the necessary work expected. You will not appoint an auditor, for instance, to do the imaging of a computer, would you? With that said, for this panel, thank you very much for being part of this. I'm going to call in the next grouping of people. Thank you very much for sharing your information with the delegates, not only contact details, but your valuable input, and for standing up against fraud. And we look forward to having you back one of these days. I'll be then calling the others on. Have a wonderful day further. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Jaco.
Right. So what we'll do is we're going to call upon the next group to be part of the session. As you can see, there's a lot of uncertainty still, even amongst professionals. But regulation is key. Making sure that we do the right thing and we appoint the right people is key. And that's one of the reasons why we've created standards to say that you cannot be a forensic accountant, for instance, if you're not a CFE and have accounting background. something that we're going to talk a little bit now. You cannot sit on a board of directors, and you should not, if you don't have the necessary experience to ask the relevant questions. So with the following presenters on stage, I want to welcome you all back. I'm going to start off with Rikeshni. So I made actually the last comments on your session. So the question that was posed is, do you assist and advise and also train people on the Companies Act? So that you participate and that you have meetings with the regulator when the new Companies Act was again drafted now, it's out for public comment. How actively involved is the directors, the Institute of Directors in that? And then second to that is, how do you deal with directors who do not act ethically, such as those that got exposed at the SABC?
Thank you, Jaco. So firstly, on the Companies Act training, we don't provide specific Companies Act training, as that's a legislative document. Our training does cover it to an extent as far as it applies from a board perspective and what directors may need to know. In terms of our involvement with the Companies Act changes and amendment bill, we have been involved. We have interacted with the DTI on a number of areas that were proposed, and we have provided comments on both versions of the bills, both from an IODSA perspective and from a King Committee perspective as well. So I hope that answers the questions briefly. Your second or your last question, Jaco, was what do we do with directors who were found unethical? Can you just repeat that last one?
Yeah, so when directors are found to be unethical, like we found with the SABC matter, where some of the directors did not give the correct credentials through on their qualifications. So what steps do the IAB take, and do they report the directors? I mean, it's a similar question, I think, than what was posed to the other panelists previously.
Yeah. So unfortunately, from our specific perspective, there's nothing we could do as an organization. If they were members, we could take action against them and revoke their membership or designation. But if they weren't members, not much that we could do in terms of reporting them. In terms of reporting as well, it's difficult being from an outside perspective. You would need to know the exact facts. You need to know the circumstances in order to lay an official report. So unless we are aware of specifics, it will be difficult to do so. I would suggest the right channel would be through the CIPC and the Companies Tribunal. They do have investigative units and dedicated teams for that. And we're always in connection with the CIPC and the Companies Tribunal where they need our assistance to talk through what would the governance kind of expectations would be if they had a case.
Great, thanks. Tariru, quickly explain for us what's greenwashing.
Okay, so greenwashing is more of like a term that is being used to describe fraudulent reporting of ESG initiatives. So you see, with the drive to have a sustainable environment and a sustainable way of doing business, it's becoming a new trend now that you have investors or even credit rating agencies also evaluating a business or a company based on their ESG initiatives in their compliance. So even in the valuation of a company, when companies are being bought, in some instances, their sustainability initiatives in their state within compliance with the environmental issues has become a factor. So this has created kind of an incentive to be fraudulent in those reporting. And that's what is being loosely termed greenwashing. And it's one of the frauds that companies are doing in some circles to try and up their value in the marketplace.
Leon, you indicated that there's a couple of standards that's been compiled. I know that standards is not only that of the ACFE, it's compiled in conjunction with other professions and professional bodies. The question that was asked is integrity and objectivity is very important for the profession. Who will police the standards?
Yes, thank you, Jaco. I believe that every professional body has its own disciplinary procedures, so I can only speak on behalf of the ACFE here. We have procedures published on our website, so if an ACFE member is alleged to have transgressed any of our bylaws, code of ethics, or professional standards, there's a complaint procedure, whether it can be reported via email or by a registered post or on a reporting line. The ACFE board takes responsibility for disciplinary matters, so it is dealt with by a subcommittee at a high level. And you know, there are certain procedures, normal labor law procedures that are followed, and then obviously the sanctions that goes with that. But ultimately, if found guilty, a member could be expelled from the organization. So we are open to the public for scrutiny. And so if any member of the public, whether that's in an organization or privately, experiences any of the professional members or bodies members guilty, I'm sure the same procedures exist everywhere.
Thank you very much for that, Leon. The other question I can answer from the back end. The question was asked about the ethics standards. How far are we before we release that? I know that the ACFE did publish the standards. We did get comments on that, on the whistleblower ethics standards. So we have revised it, made the necessary changes. It will go out for public comment once more, and then we hope to send that out. On behalf of the ACFE, thanks very much for helping the drive and the fight against fraud from different levels, from directorship level, IOD, to the management accountant level, CIMA, and then also the standards that's been created by the Standards Committee. Thank you very much, Leon, Tariru, and Vikeshni for being here. I'm going to take over now to the next group to deal with their questions. Hope you have a wonderful day further. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Goodbye, Jaco and team.
Thank you. That leaves us with the last group of questions before we end the day off. There will be also a link that will be shared with you, a video link on the Kotlins, as well as on a video that we would love for you to watch, that actually talks to our attitude and how we need to deal with that, our own morals and values, and the way that we act. So I'm calling to the stage now for a quick question or two. CPB, Nick, if you can please come back, and then Kotlins, Amanda. Welcome back, Amanda. While we're waiting for Nick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a question or two, just on your project, your very important project. So the first thing is, if I'm a normal citizen, I don't have the funds to donate. What else? How else can I get involved with this specific project?
Well, at this point in time, Kotlins is obviously all around South Africa. We are in 6 of the 9 provinces currently. We have play groups where there's often work that needs to be done. You must remember we're in areas where a lot of our play groups are in community centres, old churches, in shacks, and we often need to refurb places. So we often need people to come in and fix up the roofs or replace a door or give it a paint. So there's always volunteerism that we promote. Obviously with COVID, it's a bit more difficult now because there's restrictions, especially with the children. But yes, there's a volunteerism program that we offer. And if you go onto our website, there will be links where you can actually go put your details down and we'll make contact with you.
So teaching children to act ethically is very important, because it's like when we first spoke, I said it reminds me about the Zibby bin, where the ostrich showed you to kick your garbage into the bin and keep the country clean. I think this is the same attitude that we need to get the children to get the parents to act ethically. The question lastly asked was, where does the parents feature playing the game? Do they actually participate? How do we get them to start also acting ethically?
Well, you know, a lot of children, and I mean, it's actually proven that when you're buying something, your children actually influence a lot of what you do. So I think once we start, we'll have to do it at ground level in terms of getting the children to play the game in our play groups. And then we will invite parents to obviously join in through our parent sessions. So we will try and get this to our play groups. We'll start playing it with our children. And when we have meetings with the parents, we will encourage them to start playing with the children in the play group setup so that we can guide the parents on how to play the game. And then we'll be able to send them home with a game and say, you know, take it for the weekend or take it for a week, go play it for a few times and see, you know, how you enjoy it. And I can tell you now that by educating the parents through this kind of game, they also want their children to do the right thing. Inherently, people are good. We don't want to do things that are bad. Circumstance, I think, puts us in those situations, especially in our areas where we work. So I do think that if we can get it right at ground level, we'll be able to start influencing the parents at a later stage. And repetition, I think, is also key.
Thank you very much for that. I hope you have a wonderful full day further. All the best with your projects. You've got our support, and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nick, over to you. There was one last question. If you need to look at the fight against fraud, we already dealt with the POPI Act. Now we lastly need to deal with the Constitution. The Constitution is clear in saying that certain information is private to a person. How do you, your system link up with the Constitution and constitutional rights of the users, and the information that's provided there?
Yeah, so again, I think the best for me would be to get that legal opinion through to you guys on POPI and on the Constitution and all that. I'm not a legal person, so let me just double check that with our Chief Legal Officer, and I'll pass it through to you guys. Okay.
I look forward to having that in our next Veritas. For those that don't have access to it, we'll also publish the next Veritas on our Facebook and LinkedIn profile. Link in and be part of it. From my side, I want to congratulate all the presenters for doing a phenomenal job. Thank you very much for joining today's session. Everyone who attended. I hope you have a safe and prosperous weekend and December holidays. Remember, the fraudsters are out there. They're making money like crazy now to buy their own presents. If it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Take care. Stay safe. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.